we are live on a Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was traveling across Scotland through the frozen hinterlands of the north, enjoying myself a 50th anniversary with my parents, and it was absolutely lovely. Nice to see them. I haven't seen them really hardly at all since COVID, so it was really good to catch up with family.
Well,
hello, everyone.
Congrats to them. That's 50 years. That's a huge
50
one.
years. Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Massive I'm now feeling old. I've got 30 years before I come to my 50th anniversary. So,
was your birthday fairly recent?
My birthday is going to come on the next stream. It will be my stream birthday. In fact, why don't we, while we're gathering everybody together, why don't we decide what we'll do for the next one now? Somewhat rarely for this Sunday. Yeah. Okay. So this Sunday, it's going to be effectively my birthday stream because it'll be my birthday just before it. So I say that I'm going to choose the 3 topics this week that will drop out, and we'll do a big vote, and I might ignore it because it's my birthday.
I think that's completely fair.
Yes. The only thing I'm going to say is, of the 3 topics that I will choose, one of them most definitely won't be Gelt because he can burn in molten metal. We all know that won't happen, but he should anyway.
we already have him slotted for nightmare stuff later. Excellent. Well, okay then. Great. So, real quick before we get going, hello and everyone. Welcome. Great to see you all. Please, if you can, make sure to smack the like button and all that crap before we get going. Go check out LAWhammer. There's some really good stuff. I have thoughts for Andy from not the Alaminowith episode, but the one before that. I haven't had a chance to talk to him about it yet, but I have thoughts. Anyway,
controversy.
The wizards are everywhere. Everyone's a witch. But anyway, so we're going to not talk about that because today we're talking about Lord Skrolk, the disease that walks, one of my favorite characters. It should have been on your bingo card.
Should have been, shouldn't it? Thanks very much, BioFoot. And hey, CB4N. Thank you very much. We had an absolutely marvelous time, a lovely restaurant meal. Gifts were given, and I gave them a picture of the lighthouse where we grew up as golden memories, since that's where, well, they raised me. It was really nice. But anyway, we don't need to worry about that, and it's not going to be Gelt Sunday because screw that guy. Yeah. Right, moving on nicely.
Yeah, so Lord Skrolk, often under the moniker of the disease that walks, the big bad of Clan Pestilens that's playable. Anyway, he is the strongest of the 7 plague lords of Clan Pestilens, with Nurglitch, of course, being the arch plague lord who sits above them. Nurglitch VII. Seems that Clan Pestilens has a lot of 7s going on in the modern age, but which is interesting. But they're up to things. But as far as kind of a very brief overview before we kind of start breaking down his history and character, Lord Skrolk is very interesting from kind of an outside perspective, because when considering kind of the named characters for each of the great clans, where you've got Icket Claw for Clan Scurries, and you've got Deathmaster Snitch over in Eshen, and then Throth the Unclean for Clan Molder, and then you, of course, you got the Warlord clans with Queek Headtaker and stuff. A lot of them are fairly well explored characters, but Skrolk is actually kind of mysterious. He is a character who has been around for a really long time, at least I think since 6th edition, maybe before then.
Nope, he was around since Skaven Armulus, so 4th edition.
Yeah, so very, very old character.
Yeah, very old character.
He's kind of got copy-pasted a lot into later editions. They usually didn't innovate a ton on him. That being said, there is a surprising amount of things that we'll be able to discuss kind of around him, as well as he did, very luckily, before the Warhammer world blew up, he suddenly sort of jumped into main character territory and showed up in a lot of Black Library novels. He featured very heavily in the Thinkle and Bone Ripper trilogy, and he also played as one of the main villains of Part 4 of the End Times, which gave him a lot of screen time, which was kind of a surprise compared to some of the other characters they could have gone with. So, before we do all that, I think it's worth, Andy, if you have any thoughts or words to say about Skrolk as far as where he started developmentally wise and kind of came along in the years.
Yeah, I do. But before I go, I would just like to say that unlike Gelt, I kind of adore Skrolk. I've long adored Skrolk as a character, largely because when I first did I wouldn't say it was my first Skaven army, but it was my first big Skaven army, all the way back for the 4th edition of Warhammer. Lord Skrolk was the character that I chose to lead it. So that miniature, the old Lord Skrolk miniature, holding his book and his big plague sensor bear.
I don't think he ever got a new mini. I think that was just his mini for all
deal,
time.
Yeah. And they end up using that model as a plague priest and a variety of other things in various productions. If, for example, you go to the Lustrio book, you'll find the old Skrolk miniature being used just for a plague priest in there. But I've painted that miniature about 7-8 times at least. And I really dig the character, which is one of the reasons why I'm going to find today particularly fascinating, because it's a character that all the way back in 4th edition Warhammer, for the first Skaven army list which was released, got a good bit of meaty detail. It was quite nice, a lovely representation of Clan Pestilens. So here's Clan Pestilens, and here's the character that represents him, the same way that Ikit Claw did the same thing, as was already discussed by Sotek there. But unlike all the other characters, as time wore on and opportunities were presented to add a great deal more detail about Skrolk, they kind of didn't. And it's really fascinating to see how the other Skaven characters have had a great deal of extra depth added, but Skrolk, by comparison, as has been noted, has been uplifted, copy-pasted, uplifted, copy-pasted, with maybe a couple of extra details. If, for example, we go to, I think it was the 7th edition army list for the Skaven, he's not even given a card sheet, it's just a quick paragraph. Oh yeah, Lord Skrolk exists. Yeah, he's definitely out there. He's a thing.
Here's his stats. Have fun.
No stats. No anything.
He's in the book. He's in the book.
And 7th, I don't think he has for 7th. He has an 8th.
Skaven did not get an 8th book.
Okay, so then the one before
you're thinking 6th.
I'm thinking 6th. Get my wrong edition.
He got cut out of 6th.
Yeah. He got himself just a paragraph in 6th, which was copy paste some of the bits with a couple of little details here and there, then done. Then we came to the last edition, and he got his character back again. And again, a lot of the details were copy-pasted and lifted out. I think it was Jeremy Vettick that wrote that one, as I recall. There's a couple of extra details added, or just rewordings. It's almost a little bit like an early Chat GPT variation of Skrolk, in that it was a rewording of something that had already been out there. And you look at it and go, that's pretty much nothing new at all. And whilst he did pop up here or there in a book or two, we don't have a lot, but we do have a lot of important details. Little things like Skrolk was responsible for spreading disease and bringing down entire civilizations, including entire cities which were destroyed by him. And that poses questions. So he's responsible for diseasing up at least one, if not two, civilizations in the Warhammer world. And he was responsible for wiping out entire cities worth of people with the diseases he's unleashed. And that does pose the question, which one?
Yeah.
Where and when? Because we have a lot of timelines. And those timelines give us quite a few Skaven unleashings without any specific details. So we can start to pick apart the story of Skrolk if we look between the lines.
Yep. Please don't do this. But if you do, please don't send it to us.
Holy crap!
Two wizards, one mask. And Hammond, thank you for
holy crap!
What would we do without you and the Kree-Skrolk War?
The Kree-Skrolk War. Quite. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where we go with this one, because I imagine we're both going to have various ideas for where Skrolk may have been, where he definitely was, and even simple stuff like, how fucking old is he in the first place?
Yeah.
Because it's not detailed.
Yeah, so Skrolk, all they say is he's ancient. That's all we get. He's ancient. He's been around for the one hint they do give is that he's considered ancient even by the standards of other Skaven who have lived for a really long time. Which other Skaven, like Ikit Claw is a good example, have lived for hundreds of years. Like Ikit Claw has been around since before Asvar Kul and that whole thing. Yeah. So it's reasonable to assume that Skrolk is probably at least 500 years old, but could be a lot older. He could be way older. I mean, if we think, just looking at Nurglitch, there have only been 7 Nurglitches, and
Yes.
that Clan Pestilens has a goofy little Pope thing they do, where if you get to be Archplague Lord, you immediately become Nurglitch. And it seems it's more almost of a title as opposed to an actual name.
Yes.
Because there's mention of there being like a Nurglitch Poxifus or something, which was one of the Nurglitches back in Lustria. But in any event, there have been
Or
7.
you also get the character sheet for the first Nurglitch
Yes,
inside
in
the
the Lustria
Lustria campaign book, which is worth just having a look at so you can compare and contrast. But yeah, we do have some details though about his beginnings, because they just basically copy pasted his very first beginnings again and again and again. And that is that in his humble origins, he was a plague priest. Now, the fact that he started as a plague priest immediately allows you to start dating things. That means Clan Pestilens is Clan Pestilens. It's not the original name that clan went under. It is the clan that has undergone a completely new process as it moved to Lustria and changed itself, became something new. And that also dates it to approximately any time after around about the time of Sigmar. So he's probably not.
We narrowed it.
We've narrowed it down already. He's not older than 2,500 years old. Good start. We also know that he did one thing as a plague priest. Very early in his life, he came to the feet of Nurglitch. Doesn't say which one. Could have been the first one. And the unholy aura of Nurglitch was enough that he plucked out his own eyes before him, screeching away, tearing at his eyes. And remember, he's a religious figure, so you've also got that slight undercurrent that because, you know, he's religious, there could be some sort of seerage going on here. Pulls out all of his eyes so that he'll never see anything but Nurglitch ever again. The last thing he will ever see will be the unholy awesomeness that is the leader of all Clan Pestilens.
Yeah.
Gouge. And then not a lot in terms of what happened next.
Yeah, but there's a couple of interesting things to touch on there, which I don't think he's Scavor. I think we figured out who Scavor is, in my opinion. Go watch our last stream.
Oh yeah,
let's see about that theory. But Hammond, we don't Skaven don't keep receipts. Skaven would never save their receipts. Jonathan, yes, thank you for the. I am not going to accept food from Skrolk. No. I'll accept the tip.
Yes.
Skrolk, children.
I imagine Skrolk's voice is much deeper and lower and rounder. If you're going to do
his
that.
Total War voice actor is fantastic. Like,
I'm interested. I've not heard it yet, so I need to hear that because I love Skrolk.
He sounds very sick and
like you need to be coughing and racking and pulling up all the flame from.
He doesn't sound good, like in a good way. But
love it.
What's interesting with what Andy talked about there is already there's 2 big weird red flags, which is that we don't know which Nurglitch Skrolk saw, but as a humble priest, he came across them, and there's only 7 Nurglitches, which across 2,500 years, that's a really long time for only 7 guys named Nurglitch. That means every Nurglitch has probably lived, and that's actually. The first Nurglitch was 100 years before Sigmar was born, because he was doing the whole war against the Tehinuan stuff. So that's actually like 2,600 years with only 7 guys. So Nurglitches live a really fucking long time, apparently.
Yeah, and that to me is very odd. It seems a mixture of conflicting lore types and people who are doing the writing, not necessarily thinking everything through. Because, for example, we know that those who have touched the Great Pillar. Now, if you don't know your Skaven lore, approximately 210 years before the destruction of 220 years before the destruction of the world, during the Great War against Chaos, to end the Great Civil War between all the Skaven. Pretty much the Horned Rat turns up after a great summoning. We won't go into the details here. This is not important to the overall story, but it's important to one thing about Skaven. Drops an enormous pillar down amongst them all, made of warpstone, obs with 13 sides, obs filled with rules and commandments. And to serve on the Council of 13, you got to touch this fucker. And it kills pretty much anything that touches it. Which means that you become blessed by the Horned Rat when you touch this. That is what grants those that have touched it their long life. in particular, those who've touched that, the great lords of decay of the Skaven, become something much more than they were before. And they have lived, those lot, for at least the last 200 and odd years until the end of the world. They're super special. They touch it, they survive, they live for a long time. Others that live for a long time need a damn good fucking reason for it, because Skaven don't live long. Now, there are examples of many Skaven who have, because they've used sorcery science or they've used some crazy Skaven contraption or whatever.
Yeah,
But
Clan Scurries has like a whole long life elixir they perfected a really fucking long time ago. But
because Clan Skyer rocks. But we clearly don't have something that is the same here, but we must. So there's been basically a big hole written into the rules here with a quick why. Not only are the Nurglitches really long in terms of their lifespans, but so is Skrolk, one of their most famous plague priests, and one would presume of that, maybe others too. So those that are in Clan Pestilens, it looks like they have picked up quite a lot of the old, as long as that I don't die, I kind of don't die if I'm a plague priest. It's
which, real quick, Mortimer, hello. Thank you for being here. I saw your artwork that you sent to me and Andy on Twitter of Lord Skrolk. It looks absolutely amazing. Thanks for doing that.
Oh, I missed that. Holy shit balls.
You should look at it.
I'm going to go look at that while you go and discuss awesome shit.
Yeah. And Mr. Pig, quick question I thought of. Does a new Nurglitch get a name as soon as the previous one passes away, or is there times without one? I would guess, based on, we're going to get into some stuff and I'll explain why I think this is in a second, but it's probably when someone kills the old Nurglitch.
Yeah,
I am very suspicious that Nurglitches probably do not die through normal means, which we'll get into in a second. So, which I'm going to do right now. So, as Andy kind of stated, Skaven, for the record, Skaven are lucky generally if they make it to like 3 years old, 5 years old. They'll die of old age by like 10 without some sort of outside interference. Skaven are very they don't live a long time at all. Yeah. But one of the things, so Clan Pestilens figured out a way to live for incredible lengths of time. Like someone in chat thankfully did the math, but if you were to split the timeline of Clan Pestilens existing between all 7 Nurglitches, you're averaging somewhere in the ballpark of 300 to 400 years for each Nurglitch. We know that Nurglitch the 7th has at least been alive for a little over 200 years because he touched the Black Pillar at the end of the Second Civil War. And
importantly survived, which suggests something that we are going to be discussing later is going to be very difficult to be the case. But we'll get onto that later. This is foreshadowing.
Yeah. I'm sure a professional GM wouldn't know anything about that. But what's really interesting is when looking at ways to live a really long time and you do not have, let's say, an easy to go solution, like Andy kind of mentioned, there are 2 go-tos in the general gist of Warhammer Fantasy, which is magic or divine assistance. Now, what's interesting about Clan Pestilens is that they sit at a perfect crux between those 2 positions. Because one thing we kind of mentioned with Skrolk, and what makes Skrolk such a fascinating character, is that a lot of Skaven, you may kind of get the idea, kind of looking at them or listening to their voice lines, that, oh, these guys are very, very religious, and they're very good about following their religion. Yeah, they're very opportunistic followers of faith, is a good way to put it. They tend to beseech the Horned Rat and offer him praise almost as often as they curse him, if they're feeling brave enough to do so. And how religious a Skaven is actually comes up a lot in stories about them, where it's pretty rare to have a Skaven that's genuinely fanatical towards the Great Horned Rat, even among like the Greyseer clan, who are technically supposed to be as
terrified of him.
Yeah, they're scared of him, terrified of him, but like love him or like really fervently work, like willing to lay their lives down in order to do what's best for the Great Horned Rat. Not as much, depending on the rat. Most of them don't. Like most of them, if they have the opportunity to take advantage of someone else's fanaticism to further their own ends, they will. Skrolk is unique. Skrolk had no idea no assurance, no anything that by ripping out his eyes, he was going to have some kind of failsafe program. He was so devout and so genuinely like inspired by Clan Pestilens' interpretation of the Great Horned Rat bringing ruination through the process of disease, which is a Clan Pestilens had a very unique experience with that. It does fit the Great Horned Rat. The Great Horned Rat is about ruining, is about ruination in all its forms. Disease is simply another way to achieve that, was kind of the epiphany that they had.
I'd add a little bit there just to make sure that we do it. It's not just about ruination. That's part of a process. Basically, what they're doing is they're terraforming. Now, I know this is going really beyond the scope of what we normally use for our fantasy language, but that's the whole point of their we shall inherit. They are pretty much terraforming the world to be good for Skaven, which currently it kind of isn't. Ruin the entire world and then rise up from the depths and take over it. That is what the Skaven are doing. And one route towards that ruination is disease, death, disease, and the disaster that follows with that. There are other routes, just going to war. That's where the warlord clans get their shtick from. And as we know from the other clans, there are some other perhaps crazier routes as well. But the core of it is ruination. And before I kick back again, I'm going to say one other thing here that's worth making very, very clear. The Skaven are not a monolithic culture. This is something that is often done very wrong in the computer games and sometimes in the novels as well, where they make all Skaven basically the same. They make them all often mad sorcerer scientists, regardless of their clan. Now, that's not always the case, but particularly for computer games, that often is the case, where it's the glowing green crazy guys with all the crazy tech, make everything go boom, and we laugh at them, ho, ho, ho. Where the Skaven themselves aren't that. There are a whole variety of different clans, all of which have got their own versions of faith, all of which have got their own history, all of which have got their own stories, all of which have got their own drives, needs, hopes, and fears, whether that's what sort of breeding rights they can secure when they're in Skaven Blight, whether that's what sort of trade rights they can secure, because these are proper cultures. Don't just think of them as crazy lunatics running around stabbing each other in the back. They're not. They have a plan. That plan was put in place by the Horned Rat 200 years ago. A massive plan to take over the world. Before that, they weren't, as we consider it, a faction. They were multiple factions, all at war with each other, and had been for some, 3,400 years, something like that. And the Horned Rat pulled them together, allowing you to get a single army list instead of 40 army lists. Because if it wasn't for that, you'd end up with a Pestilens army list, a Skyer army list, because much like Bretonia and the Empire are two factions of humans that don't work together because they've got their own political basis, it's exactly the same for the Skaven clans. They are not army list human.
Hammond, you joke, but I wonder that myself sometimes. They got strong genes over there.
We do. The genes are strong, that much is certain. So all of that is to say that as we're looking at this, Lord Skrolk is a really good example of a Skaven who is not like the standard stereotype we're all used to, because he is devout. He is singular in his purpose, and he is, along with that, working towards the great plan of the Horned Rat as well. Indeed, his devotion is a part of that. And what happens in Skaven Blight 200 and a bit years ago, when good old Horned Rat comes down, changes his life too.
Yeah, so looking at his devotion, I really do want to quadruple come down on and emphasize that, even for the most religious factions in Warhammer Fantasy, just any race that you could possibly think of, the idea of seeing a guy, it's not like he's seeing the god, he's not seeing the Great Horned Rat himself, just seeing Nurglitch, but seeing Nurglitch as such a holy entity that has all these crazy diseases and boils and buboes and open sores and all this stuff. Skrolk went, this is the greatest thing I'm ever going to see in my life. I will never top this moment. Don't need these anymore. And he rips his own eyes out. And to put it kind of simply, he gets deeply rewarded in this moment by not Nurglitch, the Great Horned Rat himself.
Yeah.
his god literally reaches down and basically bonks him on the head and turns him into an oracle, a genuine oracle that Skrolk has the most insane version of sight in Warhammer Fantasy, because he doesn't see like everybody else does, where like you'll have people that are like, oh, I can see the winds of magic, or I can see based on like echolocation or whatever bullshit, what weird stuff, or I can see souls. Skrolk's vision comes from his own disease and decay radiating out around him and interacting with reality. So he has this super bizarre form of vision that is actually so accurate that it makes him, even from a Skaven standard, superhuman. Of that, nothing sneaks past Skrolk. Literally nothing. Even though his senses, by all rights, because of his various diseases, should be completely ruined. But they're not. He is he's hundreds and hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old, which we'll get into in a second. But he also has this incredible ability that, because the rot that radiates him is divine in a sense, he can sense the winds of magic. He can sense things that are invisible. He can sense anything that's living or dead. He can sense there's nothing that could sneak up on him. There's an excellent portrayal of him in the second Thanquol and Bone Ripper book, where these group of Clan Ashen assassins, who are like the best there is, they have their scent glands removed. They don't get off scents. They use special materials so that they're invisible to the eye, and they move in really special ways, and they have magical shenanigans. They try and sneak up on Skrolk, and like at 50 yards away, he already knows they're there. Like he doesn't have to react to it, and he completely obliterates them through some fun shenanigans we'll get into when we talk about his specific diseases. But he's a nightmare. He's a genuine nightmare because his form of vision is so unique. Like anywhere you look. I mean, even if you're looking at other Oracle characters, which Oracles are all blind generally in Warhammer Fantasy. If you're like an actual Oracle.
Yeah.
But
not 100% consistent, I will say, but it is common.
Yes, it is. It is very common. It's unusual to see them with their eyes. Like even the skink oracles don't have eyes. They have helmets that completely block their eyes out, and they ride troglodytes, which don't have eyes. It's a very running theme. But so that is a level of fanaticism we're dealing with, and his god is directly interacting with him, which I find really fascinating, particularly because when we're looking at like priests for other races, generally speaking, they're just wizards. Like they're called priests, but most of the time they're wizards that they kind of interact with the winds of magic more akin to a wizard than like a human priest. But Skrolk kind of doesn't. Like he's almost more of a like he is a wizard, which we'll get into later. But he also almost has that level of priestly interaction with the Great Horned Rat that like a human does with the likes of Ulrich or Sigmar, which is super weird.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I find this to be one of the better aspects of Skrolk as a character. There is clearly a little bit more going on here. He has been touched, he has been rewarded, and he has received gifts because of this. I think is also, I think it'd be almost fair to say that given his nature, that it's quite likely that it was the first Nurglitch that he laid his eyes upon.
I would agree.
And the reason that I would suggest that, and perhaps we've already had an agreement on this side, is because it was such a defining moment. And the second one would be, by its very nature, somewhat less defining. It is the first one. It is the instigator. It is the rat who has made all of the enormous sacrifices and made all of the extraordinary steps to realize the truth of the horned rat through a different expression of faith. In this case, through disease. And Skrolk goes, yes. Now, if Skrolk was already going to do this, there's a certain level of, if it's the second one, why tear your eyes out? Really, what did he see that was special that he wouldn't have seen before? I mean, you could argue he was young. There's all manner of stuff. But I think if we're looking to build the archetypical stories, which Warhammer often does, you're almost certainly looking at a character who's something like this. He saw the first Nurglitch. He was like, yes, this is exactly how we move forwards. He tears his eyes out, and then he, in turn, refuses to ever become Nurglitch. Because as far as he's concerned, there's only ever one. Plague Priest right up the top, sure. But there has to be a reason why for centuries there has been an enormous amount of influence from him, but somehow he has never reached the top of the clan. And you need to build a story to make sense of that.
Okay.
I'm liking the at this side.
Yeah, that was a eureka moment for me. That's another huge point for Skrolk is fucking weird. Because Skaven advancement, all that matters. It doesn't matter who the hell you're talking about. You're talking about all the Grey Seers. All they're all trying to do is be the best Grey Seer, the most powerful Grey Seer, the Warlords, the Council of 13. Every single Skaven in existence is in the rat race to get to the top. Except for Skrolk.
Yeah.
He's because he's that devout.
He's got religion, man.
Yeah, it's not about him.
Yeah, it's not about him. It's about doing what the Horned Rat, doing what Nurglitch thought was the correct path forward. And he does not crave leadership in the same way that most Skaven do. Because if he had have done, he'd already have it. He would be the one that's sitting on the Council of 13 right now. And I would argue, I'm going to make an argument here for something that's to come, he's already been on the Council of 13. In fact, I'm going to say that he almost certainly has, because they went to war for over the Council of 13 before they came down and slammed the pillar down, and a full 4 positions were held by Clan Pestilens. 4 positions in the Council of 13. And some of them backed out as part of the deals that they made. So I think that there's a strong likelihood he's already been up there.
You might be onto something.
Yeah, because we're looking here, and this is an archetypical character of all Skaven. If we're looking at a character who represents the top right down to the bottom, these are the sort of stories that we should be talking about. So it seems to me very likely. Fuck you. That's all I'm saying to that.
That's law, not guilt. They both blew themselves up. It's those two.
Yeah, totally. Hey, Brian!
Oh Jesus. Thank you, Brian. Very generous. Just the smiley face. Thank you.
You are the Horned Rat. No, you're not the Horned Rat. You're great.
If you're into that, you're the Horned Rat. If not, we take it back.
Admittedly, I'm fully aware that's a spicy take, and I'm fully aware that is not strongly suggested by the background. But what is suggested by the background is that Clan Pestilens was at war with the rest of the Skaven clans for most of its existence, except for the last 200 years, really. There's periods over the last 1,000 where they've been in and out of favor. But after all the great failures of the diseases around about 1,500 years ago, approximately, they fell massively out of favor, and they lost their positions in the Council of 13. It wasn't just through combat. They literally withdrew. And that being the case, it would not surprise me if not only that Skrolk was once on the Council of 13, that he was possibly the one that released the Black Plague.
Yes. Okay. So for everyone that's listening that's maybe not familiar with the timeline, I'm going to give a super brief rundown of like kind of important highlights because we're going to be touching on them a lot. Which is that, generally speaking, 100 years, actually more like 200 years before Sigmar's born, Clan Pestilens went to Lustria. They somehow found tunnels that after the Doomsday Engine almost wiped out Skaven Blight, it made a bunch of cracks underneath the earth, and they followed some of those cracks all the way to Lustria, underneath the ocean. And they set up in Lustria. It didn't go well. There was a lot of horrible diseases because the lizardmen turned Lustria into a literal hellscape, and they got super diseased, and they were like a normal Skaven clan. Like they had rat ogres and a bunch of other normal stuff, but they got super duper sick, and most of them died. But those that survived in their disease, they had an epiphany where they realized they could embrace the Horned Rat through this new form of worship, being disease. And by doing so, they turned to faith, and it basically provided them with a form of armor, in a sense, where the diseases strengthened them instead of weakening them. And they grew in power. They fought a big war against the Lizardmen for over 100 years. They end up losing the war because of Tehennawyn and Sotek, and they bust out and run away back across the ocean, arrive in the Southlands. And because that's the tunnel that they took. When they get to the Southlands, Nurglitch VI leads, he basically goes, hey, we're back. And all the other Skaven go, who the fuck are these guys? Because nobody's heard from them in centuries. and he starts a rampage through the Southlands towards Skavenblight. Because he basically says, hey, guess what? I'm stronger than you guys, so I'm going to kick your asses because I have all these diseases, and I can make diseases that hurt you and not us. So Clan Pestilens, shows up out of nowhere, and against all the Warlord clans, Clan Scurries, Clan Molder, Clan Eshin hasn't arrived yet, but against all these other clans, he single-handedly says, we're going to fight you guys, and all the Grey Seers, and he almost wins.
Yep.
Like Clan Pestilens, who has lost against the Lizardmen and had to completely move their headquarters to the Southlands, they, by all intents and purposes, should be on their last leg. No, they come in and just start because disease is just that scary. It's that powerful of a weapon. And they almost take over. They almost win the fight for Skavenblight. But then,
just so we get an idea, it's about 400 or 500 years worth of civil war amongst the Skaven. It's a long time.
Yep. And what happens is that, luckily for Skavenblight, Clan Eshin comes back. And Clan Eshin turns the war because they start assassinating all the plague priests. And Nurglitch goes, uh-oh. So Nurglitch fights his way to Skavenblight, surviving lots of assassinations. And he basically says, tell you what, you should let me on the council. And they say, why? And he says, because I brought this disease with me. And if I drop this, everyone in this room is going to die. And they went, okay. And then he duels a current member. He kills that member in a duel, which is the old way they used to handle it. And he becomes, I believe he claims the 7th seat.
7th seat at that point. I think it's 7th.
Yeah, it is, because they eventually advanced to the 10th seat.
Yes, they do.
But and then they join, and then they were like, okay, the war's over, only for Clan Pestilens to get stronger and stronger and stronger because they start working with all these other groups. And then the Black Plague incident happens, which is the Skaven unleash the Black Plague. It's awful. It kills hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. The Empire,
the Empire falls pretty much.
Yeah, the Empire, by all
okay, so again, let's just drop in a little bit of timeline. This is 1111. Yes. Okay, so we're sitting around about 1,100 years after Sigmar now. So the Emperor at the moment is Boris Goldgatherer, and I think you get an idea of how bad he was just by his name. And the Black Plague hits, and it doesn't just wipe out. In fact, it does more than just wipe out the Empire. The Skaven then go to war with them and take pretty much every single city. There's lovely bits describing how Ubersreich was basically a large rat warren, how Nuln had completely fallen, how Altdorf was a shadow of itself. Remember, Altdorf at this size was not the capital we know and love today. It was a far smaller city. The only place that truly held out was Middenheim.
Yes, and this is where we get the legendary Mandrid Skaven Slayer, one of
the Rat Slayer as he came to be known.
Yeah, he got slandered with time. Awesome emperor, genuinely a kick-ass emperor. He's also really depressing. His story is really sad, but
that's for another stream.
Yeah, he uses the Skaven's own idiocy against themselves because they do their classic thing of they almost win, then they start infighting. And amongst their infighting, something weird happens, which is that the Black Plague, somebody fucks with it. Which if you read the Black Plague trilogy, it kind of reveals who it is. It ends up starting to infect other Skaven. So suddenly this horrible disease that was supposed to not hurt the Skaven does. And at this point, Clan Pestilens has 4 seats on the council. They are unstoppable. The Grey Seers are terrified at because religiously the Grey Seers and the Plague Priests do not get along. Their versions of the Great Horned Rat are not the same. They proselytize about 2 very different ideologies of what the Great Horned Rat is. So from a religious standpoint, they fight each other. And Clan Pestilens was basically becoming preeminent. And then the Black Plague starts killing all the Skaven. And that goes really, really bad. The Empire rallies, kicks the shit out of them, forces them out. And all of Skavendom just descends into anarchy. Because everyone that was not Clan Pestilens turns to Clan Pestilens and go, you fucked up. This is your fault. And Clan Pestilens goes, well, we have 4 seats, so no. And the Council of 13 starts killing each other.
Yeah. There's also the Bretonian Red Pox incident, which is just another issue that they have to deal with. Cut a long story short, through the course of the next so many hundred years, it all goes very wrong for Clan Pestilens, and they withdraw to a degree from their Council of 13 positions, except for Nurglitch, which is the only one that's left extant. But it's fair to say that that's going to turn into complete civil war in short order.
Yeah, and then 200 years ago, the Grey Seers realize Skavendom has just kind of been in a rut for hundreds of years, and they send off a big ritual.
It's a bit more than a rut. They are literally slaughtering each other whole scale. It's a massive war. It would be a little bit like if the Empire had been at war with Bretonia for the last 500 years, and it was just this bitter length of castles, murder, mayhem, and awfulness. And the Grey Seers didn't like this.
Yeah, so and I realize sounding this, you're going to go, I have questions, but we don't have time for it today because we're going to talk about other stuff.
We're scrolking. We're giving you a timeline so you understand what happens with the scroll.
Yeah, the Great Horned Rat is literally summoned into existence. He eats a whole bunch of Skaven. It's kind of hilarious. And he drops, like Andy said, drops the 13-sided black pillar and says, anybody that touched this has my blessing. Peace out. And he leaves after giving them some instructions. And the black pillar is carved with instructions. It has the plan on it. The mission of how they're going to do all their things. And the Council of 13 that is made that day is still the Council of 13 we have to this day, which very notably does not have any double seats, which used to be normal. It used to be very normal for one clan to have lots of seats. Now only every clan gets one seat, no matter how powerful they are, which is very, very interesting. So we got a couple super chats. We need to
start off with Jonathan at the top there. How did the other clans stop Clan Pestilens schemes? You know, that was the big question that has plagued Skaven existence for the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, 2,500, because they haven't been able to stop their schemes. That's the problem. You want to know how they did it? They summoned the horned fucking rat and said, "Oi, stop!"
They called mom.
Yeah, pretty much that. Necroplayer 97.
Quick question: does the Great Horned Rat provide the same pain protection to his worshippers that Nurgle does? In a sense, yes. It's more that they are given the ability to survive their disease, and because of what the disease does to their bodies, they kind of stop feeling a lot of things because their skin gets so thick and leathery, their nerves start to kind of die.
I have an opinion on this, and that is that they are two different gods. They have two different ways of doing it, but I would not say pain protection is the correct way of dealing with it. It's tolerance.
Yeah, that's a very fair way to put it. Yeah.
Just because you can tolerate it doesn't mean that you can't suffer through the holy blessings of your God. Suffering and dealing with that suffering on both of them in different ways is a part of being a follower of that particular God. These diseases are to be reveled in, to be experienced, to be understood. If you're in Clan Pestilens is all about understanding the diseases and how they can be used in order to fulfill the great plan. Not the great plan Lizardman style, but the great plan nevertheless Horned Rat style.
Yeah, the furry one.
Where with Nurgle, it's a literal blessing from their god, and the despair that comes hand in hand with that, and the acceptance that can come hand in hand with that in turn, is a part of the experience. To say it's pain protection is a nice way of trying to look at it from the outside and saying, Nurgle's not that bad, right? Yeah, fuck no. It's awful.
What I will say as a pseudo counter to that is there are people that turn to Nurgle to get relief from disease, which he can offer. But what's interesting, the Horned Rat doesn't. That is not something the Great Horned Rat does, which kind of, once again, goes to show how fucking crazy Clan Pestilens is.
And agreed on both counts, because that's one of the greatest recruiting tools of Nurgle, is someone falling to despair and then Papa Nurgle's sweet whispers coming out. Ho, ho, ho.
Yeah, that's why I would fall to Nurgle really fast. It would be really bad. I can freely admit that about myself.
I can get you past this, but your life is going to be very, very different. So nice one, thanks.
And thank you all very much for the super chats. We really appreciate it. I'm gonna decide disease is probably way more effective against the incredibly unorganized, unhygienic, and cramped Skaven warrens than the Lizardmen. Also, hi again. You're not wrong. Clan Pestilens probably found the Skaven to be laughably easy to deal with during the first Civil War, which is probably why they pretty much won it until
they dominated. Yeah, they massively dominated the First Civil War, and there's a reason for that. But I'll also add that Skaven as a species are much more disease tolerant anyway, for a variety of reasons, meaning that many of the things that would say, for example, bring down a human society would be laughably negligible to a Skaven society.
Yeah, also, life is cheap in Skavendom. Like,
it really is.
Lost 1,000 people to disease?
Indeed, they breed extraordinarily quickly. They can turn over from being in a position of weakness to a position of strength in a matter of months to years. So, yes, while simultaneously saying that it's not as much of an impediment as you might immediately think.
More like man dread. That's what the Skaven probably called him. Yeah. Man dread thing.
Yeah, totally.
Ricky Scotty, thank you. Very generous. Thank you very much. A bit behind. Sorry, this interrupts. Please don't apologize for that. That's what we're here for.
Apologize. Yeah.
Actually, okay, I have to take a brief second to say, we see the comments of people being like, oh, this format, like they keep interrupting. Shut up. Like, I say this lovingly, but it's a podcast where we're just hanging out and chatting. It's not
it's
like
part of the fun.
Yeah,
it's not the bits I love most. Yeah,
it's a dialogue. So, if you don't like it, deal with it. Anyway, moving on. I've been needing to say that. Is it all possible that Skrolk is a favorite of the Horned Rat and is made to be sold that he can faithfully push/threaten Nurglitches to hardline the Horned Rat's plans?
Yes.
Yeah,
definitely. In many respects, I think that's one of the reasons why he's taking the shadowy vizier position rather than necessarily sitting on the council itself anymore, or indeed challenging Nurglitch, because no, that would be ridiculous. Why would you challenge he who is responsible for putting the Horned Rat's plan into place? Yes, Skrolk is, as we noted earlier in the stream, a little bit different.
Yeah, Dirty, thank you very much. So, with all the timeline stuff that we kind of talked about out of the way, and we caught on the super chats, now me and Andy can go back to saying, how old does it look like Skrolk is because of everything that means he would have lived through? And I agree with Andy wholeheartedly. Nurglitch the First makes the most sense. Because if you think about it, Nurglitch the First, compared to the other Nurglitches, which are much more political individuals, Nurglitch the First was a genuine warrior. He was a prophet, and he was an incredibly powerful spellcaster.
Yeah.
Like, he was going toe-to-toe with Tehinuin, and he survived that war. That's the thing. He didn't die in the fights against Tehinuin. He escaped, which, Skaven. But, like, he literally rode around the battlefields on a great pox rat, beating people to death with his big old mace thing. And he was a nasty piece of work. And it is very likely to me that he was not just like, because remember, the Council of 13, there was no pillar black back then. It was literally purely a political position. That's all it was. You didn't really get much out of it, other than like power. But he was very likely an avatar of the Great Horned Rat, this new embodiment of the Great Horned Rat.
I don't know if I go as far as that, because in some respects that almost diminishes him and makes the Horned Rat be responsible for many of his actions. In fact, I think to make his story better, he figured it out for himself. He survived the worst that Lustria had to offer in terms of the diseases and the awfulness that they encountered, and he turned that into success.
Not an avatar in the sense that like an Aryan, like where his like mind is kind of messed up. I mean more of like he's
in
like
terms
an
of
embodiment.
intention.
Like he's like an embodiment of plague. Like the Horned Rat has juiced him up so much that looking at him, no other Nurglitch could compare, because none of them
agreed
were like him.
And I'd say that those that followed him are basically following his plan, his intent, what the Horned Rat is. I'm going to bring up in just a second, Singemeister, because the comment that you've brought up, I think, is super important for us to discuss. So I'm holding it just for a second while we finish this point. And that's that. I think the first one defined the clan as a whole massively, and is probably responsible for all of its successes throughout all of the first campaigns, throughout going to war with the Skaven, throughout getting the Skaven to accept them for who they are. Your first real point of where Nurglitch may have died is probably when it all went wrong post the Black Plague. So he could have been as old as a good 1,400 or 500 years when he eventually died. And then other ones came afterwards. I'm not aware of when his death happened, unless
it's never been noted.
No, I didn't think so.
Because I would think that I would bet the first Nurglitch lived for a really long time.
Yeah,
and then when he died, they were like, oh, well, he was so important to us. Whoever takes over must be the new Nurglitch. Like, you are the reincarnation of his will, so to speak. But it's really just a political, like, Nurglitch VII, you know, he's a diseased, nasty guy, but he's not particularly doesn't take the battlefield. He doesn't really proselytize a ton. He's more there to deal with Council of 13 shenanigans. So Skrolk is the one out there preaching, fighting, dealing with shit.
So I'm going to bring this up now because I think this is an important point. This is a fundamental not just to Nurgle, but to the Warhammer world.
Sorry, if you're listening, instead of watching, it says, do we know Nurgle's thoughts on the name Nurglitch?
Yeah, I was just about to say that bit. Okay, and do we know his thoughts? Now, obviously, Chaos Gods don't have thoughts as we understand them. But I can answer this quite precisely because Nurgle is named after disease. His name literally is the definition of disease. It's a little bit like calling your god disease. Khorne is bloodshed. Tzeentch is change. Karneth, the root of Khorne, for example. Nurgleth, the root of Nurgle. Calling himself Nurglitch doesn't mean in any respect at all it has anything to do with the Chaos God. It just means that they know the root tongue. The root tongue in the Warhammer world is the basis of the lingua prestantia, for example, or which is the language used by wizards in the Empire, or Anaquaean, which is the language used by the elves to do the same. I pronounced that slightly wrong, but it's easier to pronounce it that way. And all of these languages all have the same root, which you could argue is very close to demonic. And demonic is the language that is spoken by demons and spirits and a whole bunch of other things as well, and the gods. And it is the language of meaning. It is the word. It defines reality. And calling yourself Nurglitch is nothing more than saying something of disease in the core tongue. It doesn't mean you worship Nurgle. It means that you understand the meaning of the word Nurglith.
Yeah, and to reinforce Andy's point further on that, in the Warhammer world, we use the names Tzeentch, Khorne, Nurgle, and Slaanesh because those are, in a sense, the true name, or like the name that conveys the best sense of what those gods are. But they didn't pop into existence and look at everybody and go, by the way, my name's Khorne, that's Tzeentch, he's Slaanesh, he, she, it is Slaanesh, and the fat dude over there is Nurgle. Like, they didn't have a formal meeting about that. They are ideas. They are very broad concepts that became divine and sentience. All sorts of weird shit happened. But what's interesting is that in the Warhammer world, if you're actually living in the world, you are a fucking idiot if you say their true names.
Yeah.
You don't do that. They have tons of other names. They have epithets. But like saying Nurgle, not smart. Now, if you're going to say like Nurgloth or like one of the other thousands of names the Norsca tribes have for him, that's a lot safer. Like, it still refers to him. It's still a name. It's not a title. It's a name. It's the name they used to worship. We're calling Khorne Karneth is going to be much less likely to draw their attention. But if you say their actual name, like, you are speaking a word that has power because it's a definition. It's not a name.
And if sadly you've got any capability of magic or any ability to do it, and you're not just a material nobody, if you've got any material power, saying that word has effect. In the same way that saying the words of magic using the lingua prestantia, the words of magic I discussed already, will cause effects to come into place if you can channel magic, if you can make that happen. And that will often happen whether you want it to or not. It's why the ruinous powers are referred to as such. You don't refer to them as anything other than epithets, other names, because to whisper their names is to bring them to you. And that is freaking dangerous. Dangaroos, ridiculously stupid. And in this particular case, Nurglitch does not mean devotee of Nurgle. It means someone who understands at some fundamental level what disease is. Like, it would be a little bit like calling yourself the master of disease or some equivalent.
Somebody watched one of the most recent episodes of LAWhammer. Alaminaweth, you fool.
That was noted.
Yeah. So, with
anyway,
with Lord Skrolk being, if we look at Lord Skrolk the First, having lived, let's be generous.
Nurglitch.
Let's be generous to Nurglitch the First and say that he lived until the Black Plague incident. That means Skrolk has a good window of about 1,000 years for when he could have showed up. I will say I personally doubt that Skrolk was there for the war in Lustria. I think he showed up when they were in the Southlands.
I agree.
But I do think that he was fully up and about and active in the First Civil War, which is when he got to encounter Nurglitch, get to see Nurglitch, who is full powered, rage, and they're like, oh, this is the big guy in charge. The Council 13, that's a joke. This is the real boss. Witnessed him, ripped out his eyes, and went on to fight in the wars. And I also agree with Andy because of a piece of evidence from a book that we're gonna have other thoughts about later. That Skrolk is responsible for the Black Plague. Yeah. Which the Black Plague is the most horrible disease that's ever been unleashed. The most devastating. I would argue Nurgle's Rot's probably the most horrible, but devastating would be the Black Plague. It killed so many fucking people.
Yeah.
And
so we haven't.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say we have clearly in Skrolk's background, and it's mentioned in a couple of places that he was responsible for unleashing plagues on entire civilizations, which could be the most obvious ones, Skaven and the Empire, possibly Bretonnia, because they're the ones that we have most commonly popping up, and plus the ones most likely, almost certainly down in the Southlands as well, because there's going to be empires down there that have also been attacked and devastated by the Skaven at various points in history. It's just that Games Workshop has not gone down there because of a whole variety of reasons we're definitely not getting into.
If they ever did expand more lore, which I hope they do with the old world eventually, into the Southlands, explore the cultures and people there, because they're humans that live down there, tons of them. There would have to be a big thing about the early Black Plague being used against them to kind of see how it works and fine tune it, and that would have been Skrolk. Absolutely. There's even a note in a book we're going to talk about later, which is the Lustria book by Cubicle 7, that talks a lot about Skrolk, and a lot of it's copy pasted. But one of the things they say about Skrolk that I really, really like is they talk about that when they're going over like his objectives, if you're using him as a playable character, they talk about that Skrolk goes to Lustria, and this is in his little timeline the first time he's really been there. That he has been sent by Nurglitch to lead a big old group over there after Tetueco flattened everything with a comet. And their goal is to basically dig out all the Underwarrens, find any artifacts they can find that were left behind by the first Nurglitch and all those other shenanigans. Viper Wolf. Did they spread C19? Anyway, yes.
Almost killed me, Skrolk. You tried, you failed.
Yeah, they absolutely did. But
Thanks,
what's interesting is that they note that what he's trying to do is he is looking for notes left behind by the first Nurglitch, or maybe the sixth, depending on how you look at it, he's looking for their notes because he believes if he finds them, he'll find a key so that he can take the Black Plague and perfect it. He could take it and make it into the ultimate disease that's even more virulent and even more devastating, which he knows if he could do that, it's endgame. It's game over.
Yep. So taking all of that, I think we're beginning to form parts of his character that are definitely hinted at without... I'm bringing that straight up.
Clan Rat 19.
Fuck Clan Rat 19.
I'm going to squeeze that into my stream somehow, because that makes me laugh. That really makes me laugh. Sounds like something Gerhardt
thanks for on this side. So yes, we have ourselves some clear potential character progression being discussed here without ever actually hitting the black and white of the page or the screen. And that's that we've got someone who is probably responsible for the Black Plague. It was almost wholly successful at wiping out the strongest power in the old world and arguably one of the biggest threats to Skaven Blight. But it fails, and after its failure, Skrolk never becomes Nurglitch, and there is a good reason potentially for that here. Skrolk failed. And in his heart, that will obviously be terrible, but that also puts him beneath other ones. That puts him beneath the other Nurglitches. It means we have a clear pecking order. He did not succeed in this particular endeavor. And that would also fill him with a need to succeed at a later point, which matches the character details that we have later. So I think we've got a very clear progression here where we've got someone who was responsible for unleashing diseases back during the First Civil War, almost certainly did do it down in the Southlands, perhaps wiping out or at least deeply damaging some important civilization down there, taking that plan up to Skaven Blight. Skaven Blight then, as Pestilens is in ascendance, tries to do the same thing in the north. Clan Pestilens unleashes those plagues. Skrolk is at the forefront of that, making it happen, using the Liber Bubonicus, which we'll get to relatively soon, to help further that particular plan and ensure that it's put in place. It's looking like it's going to be a complete win, but it turns into a fail, and that fail probably ended Nurglitch's life, the man that he has very much dedicated everything to, and the Skaven, the male that he has dedicated his life to, but it also showed a great flaw in what he thought was an unassailable plan. So that immediately gives you a really clean character arc for Skrolk, a clean idea of the story that he's got without it really being mentioned anywhere.
You know, I actually really love the idea of him, like, because of what happened to the Black Plague, there being the irony that it probably wasn't actually Skrolk's fault because it was this other rat who did it, that like changed the plague to use it against Skaven, and then it got out. But I love the idea that Skrolk, of Nurglitch the First dying and Skrolk holding himself responsible.
Me too.
And that being like, I don't deserve to sit on the Council of 13. Like, I'm unworthy. I'm going to go back to my studies. And what I think a good follow-up to this is this would also do a really good job of showing how the Red Pox, who would have been made by a different Plague Lord, was not nearly as effective. Like the Red Pox was it was strong, but compared to the Black Plague, it was it was a embarrassment.
It was terrible. It was almost hilarious.
But Bretonians weren't doing themselves any favors with the way their peasants, the way they live.
At this point, I would suggest that Skrolk is almost certainly one of the finest minds when it comes to disease that Skavendom has to offer, and is someone who is probably not only filled with all his deep devotion, but also crippled by significant doubt because of the failures that have been suffered and because of the steps that he has gone through that he thought was going to be successful for the Horned Rat and failed, which means contrition follows, which means that we now have a character that makes sense for his great age, enormous age, yet still not trying to push upwards. It's because he doesn't feel worthy. He is unworthy of taking Nurglitch's seat because he has yet to succeed in the same way that Nurglitch had done so beforehand. It also means that when someone else comes in as Nurglitch, he's not sitting there going, you know what, fuck you, I'm a Skaven, I'll do whatever the fuck I want, I'm also older than you, or any of the other various schemy Skaven steps. He's just like, yep, I'm going to go do what you say. I'm a devout priest, so to speak. I am going to go do my thing because I failed before. I will not fail this time. We've got ourselves a real character here. And often with the Skaven, they just fall into tired tropes that are basically based on Thanquol again and again and again, but respun in different ways because Thanquol got so much written about him. This gives us a character who is deep, who is riven, who has got complicated emotions and complicated it's not just he's got complicated motivations.
He's character.
He's got an actual freaking character, which is often not the case.
A campaign with Skrolk as the big bad.
Most bad guys in Warhammer are given a character along these lines. I am a bad guy. Watch me do evil. I am off to evil now. I shall twirl my mustache one more time. It doesn't really matter what faction they come from. They're almost all written the same. Look at my giant army. I shall take you down. Oh, no. I've been hit in the head by a hammer. I'll be back.
Yeah.
And it's a bit hilarious.
Great Nagash impression. To be fair, I think Nagash is more nuanced than that, but yes.
Paragoner.
Yes. thank you very much for the super chat. We really appreciate the sweet message. These scratch our brains too. Like,
Yeah, they really do.
I love these. Laughing God, is Skrolk more of an actor in the Will the Great Horned Rat's will, or is he a major player which amounts to a religious schism?
For me, I would much prefer if he actually was an actor in the Will of the Great Horned Rat's scheme, so to speak. But he himself is riven by doubt. He himself is unsure whether he's doing the right thing, which in many respects is quite unscaveny, where they are often filled with such self-righteous certainty as they fail again and again and again and backstab everyone else around. The Horned Rat is also a complicated god without just a single way towards success, so to speak.
Yeah.
I would prefer that he was that rather than being someone who was working against the Horned Rat's will while simultaneously thinking that he was working for it. I think it almost weakens the character because there's few characters in the Skaven, let's say, catalogue of characters that have actual character. And I would rather not immediately go, the only one that does is a bit pish.
I would say Skrolk is a character who all evidence suggests he has zero doubt in his faith, but there is some evidence that we're building here that he could have a lot of doubt in
His actions.
His ability to deliver on that faith.
And that in many respects is super Skaven, because Skaven at their very heart are fearful. And one of the core concepts whenever you're building a Skaven character is to try and manifest that fear in one fashion or another. And having Skrolk's fear being that he just isn't good enough really does ground him down as a really interesting character in comparison to some of the others who all think they're absolutely the best. And they're not just the best, they're better than everybody else. And their fear very much manifests just losing or someone else rising above them or whatever. But they all tend to be just thankful in disguise.
Yeah, especially because the Great Horned Rat, like it works very well because the Great Horned Rat's one of his biggest tenets. He is not a forgiving god at all. So it actually would pay a really cool idea and really lean into that idea of he's blessed by the Horned Rat, that he kind of gets away with having a failure, that he's like, oh shit, and the Horned Rat's like, eh.
Although in this case he didn't fail, someone else
that's true,
took the win, so to speak.
Yeah, which granted, the Horned Rat has some pretty hilarious interpretations of failure that seem genuinely thought out, because obviously Thankful is very blessed.
Yes.
But Thankful through the Horned Rat is playing like 4D chess as opposed to regular chess.
Yeah. Treachery is a core component of the Horned Rat's plan. And that means that a lot of the time they're working against each other and honing themselves to become, in the end, better weapons. Skrolk is being honed. All the chips are being taken off the edge of him. And that's very Horned Rat. That allows you to both fail and also succeed.
Yep. Predator Rules. Does Clan Pestilens ever team up with Nurgle/Nurgle worshippers? Love the stream. Hope you're having a great day. So different authors have handled this in different ways. Yeah. They will often team up, but they will just as often try to absolutely murder the shit out of each other. I actually think one of the things Age of Sigmar handled extremely well, in my opinion, was the relationship between Nurgle and Clan Pestilens, because they're much more interwoven in Age of Sigmar. Where, like, if you're playing Maggotkin of Nurgle or Clan Pestilens specifically, you can take Maggotkin, or you can take Nurgle or Skaven, Clan Pestilens as allies. Like, they're treated as allied factions. And Clan Pestilens even get the Nurgle keyword so that they're resistant to diseases. But the way the lore explores in AOS, which I think actually works really well for fantasy, is that on a surface level, they can see eye to eye, and that they both understand that a disease is a divine gift and that it is kind of a means to their glorious end. But the thing that breaks down in their relationship almost immediately, like, they might have a common enemy, so they'll like kind of work together. But as soon as they get past that initial fighting stage, they will almost immediately start fucking with each other, because the reasons they use disease, what the end goal is completely different. For Nurgle, it's about the cycle. It's the endless, grinding, despairing wheel of death, decay, rebirth, death, decay, rebirth. There is no end. There's no escape. It's awful. Just accept it and laugh at the horrible despair, because that's all you can do. Whereas, but it's about life. It's about creating more life. Now, the life is unholy and fucking awful, but it's still life. Whereas, you know, cancer is technically life. But with with Clan Pestilens, it's about ruination. It's about breaking everything down so that it's so brittle and mushy and mulchy that it can't stand against you anymore, and you can eat it and stand atop everything. But there is no like it's not about bringing back life. It's not about like, oh, like look how we're making these wonderful gardens of horrible diseases or creating tumorous growths or all this. No, it's about killing your ass.
Yeah.
That's what Clan Pestilence is about, is death. They are complete opposites if you look at it from that perspective. Nurgle is life in a really fucked up way. Clan Pestilence is ruination. It's death. It's an end.
Yep. Agreed. Broadly, lots of specifics that could be brought up, but I think that's better for a Nurgle stream because I broadly completely agree. And I think that to a degree answers much of this one, Jonathan Scott, which is what do Nurgle cults think about Clan Pestilens? And I think we've broadly covered it there. They are broadly sometimes in a similar area, but they are often enemies. And that's a good way to put it. Just the Skaven as a whole often work with chaos and often work against chaos.
Yeah, that's just Skaven and chaos in general.
Yeah, just Skaven in general. To just separate out Nurgle for Clan Pestilens is, I think, a mistake. Just because they have something in common in no way means that they are the only ones who do it. You'll find that Nurgle will work with the other clans as well, and the other clans will work with Nurgle or Slaanesh or Khorne or Tzeentch. It depends entirely on the circumstances. Skaven are actually one of the few factions in the entirety of the old world who, under the correct circumstances, will work not necessarily alongside, but most certainly towards the same goal as almost anybody else. It depends entirely on the situation at hand and what the individual Skaven who's making the decisions think.
Yeah, with Andy said, I think the best way to put it is that Clan Pestilence and Nurgle are no more likely to really work with each other than any of the other groups. It's just that they have more of an appreciation for each other's efforts, I guess. Like they have more of an understanding.
Let's be honest. A plague monk dealing with someone who is a champion of Nurgle is less likely to walk away and die 2 days later.
Yeah.
And exactly the same stands on the other side. It's not just that they have got various similar alignments potentially, it's that they themselves are immune to much of what the other group have to offer. So they make natural allies in that regard, while simultaneously they also make, particularly for the Plague Priests, interesting allies, because the Plague Priests are always looking for new infectious diseases that they can add to their Book of Woe. Indeed, the very source text they originally took from Nurgle, which is something we'll be getting on to
let's do that
relatively soon.
We
got the Book of Woe. The Book of Woe, the Liber Bubonicus.
Liber Bubonicus.
Yes, indeed. The Book of Woe is this great mighty tome that the Plague Priests work upon that gathers together everything that they've ever learned about every disease that is out there.
Actually, we missed a couple real quick.
Let's do those first because we can get to that.
Yeah,
easy.
Omnicide. Clan Pestilence tends to be much more humble, or is it close to Skaven Kit in general? Isn't it, or is Vile Broth Null skewing my view? I would say it depends on the Plague Priest. Some Plague Priests. It's individual stuff. Like some are going to be a little more kind of, I would say Clan Pestilence will skew a little more towards being genuinely religious. So they will come off more humble than others, but you can find Graciers that are like that. And
it depends how you define humble.
Yeah, but it's certainly not for all of them. There are Clan Pestilence Skaven that are all about advancement and all about pride and power. I would say probably all of the Nurglitches after the first are very much more ambitious individuals that care more about like political authority than they do about genuine disease. And like they care. They have to be very heavily diseased individuals probably to get the position in the first place. But they're all individuals. They have their own things they're going for. And then Aaron, thank you very much. Yes, diseases to Gelt. Absolutely. Yep.
Yes. See, you understand. Kill Gelt with a good old disease. So a disease, hopefully, from the Book of Woe. Now, the Book of Woe has got a long and storied history that has a couple of lore changes here or there, but they're all relatively tiny. The big one is the Liber Bubonicus itself, the one that's carried by Lord Skrolk. The core text of that was originally stolen from unspecified followers of Nurgle. Now, I say unspecified because at various points we get some specificity from different sources, but loosely speaking, at some point a long time ago, long before Skrolk was carrying it, the Liber Bubonicus was stolen, and the Skaven were particularly interested in the diseases that it held, almost certainly guided there by the Horned Rat. Perhaps this is the source of much of what Nurglitch would come to view as what was important for the Horned Rat's ruination through disease. And inside this book was this great panoply, an enormous swathe of different diseases and how they worked and been gathered by Nurgle's worshippers. They took that, mastered it, learned it, and added to it. They then took it further. And this is one of the reasons why, right at the very first beginning of Lord Skrolk's character, he was given access to spells of Nurgle. It's not because he was a worshipper of Nurgle. Let's make this incredibly clear. Indeed, in later versions of the character, he doesn't get Nurgle spells at all. And then in others, he does again. Depends on which version you look at. But it's not because he's a worshipper of Nurgle. It's because that's the Warhammer spells that we already have for disease. And it was a super easy way of using it. The very first iteration of the character did have access to all the spells of Skaven and Nurgle, just like that. The good old Liber Bubonicus gave him access to that. I think he was a 3rd level caster first time around. Can't recall off the top of my head.
Yes. So
while since I used that character, I'm feeling old now.
The last time Nurglitch got published was Lustrion 6th edition, which he was a level 3 wizard, and he used spells from the Skaven lore of Plague.
But he wasn't using the Liber Bubonicus. I was talking about Skrolk.
Skrolk. Yes.
Skrolk.
Okay. So actually, one thing I want to point out real quick: Liber Bubonicus. I'm gonna fart on Games Workshop here for a second. They were really fucking lazy with the Liber Bubonicus.
Lothar Bubonicus,
because it represents 3 different things. There are 3 kinds of Liber Bubonicuses, aka Books of Woe. So there's the big Liber Bubonicus, the huge one, which is held by whoever is Nurglitch at the time. Like, Nurglitch has a really big book. It's his version of the Great Book of Grudges, but it's the Great Book of Disease. And every 7 full turnings of Morslib, which I don't know how the fuck they track that.
Yeah, they're back together.
Yeah, all the plague priests have to get back together and add any new diseases and stuff they found to the really, really big book. So then everyone has their own personal books to their clan, which is also called a Liber Bubonicus.
Mm-hmm.
And then individual units of plague monks will have a bringer of the word who carries a book of woe, which is another way of saying a Liber Bubonicus, which are excerpts from their version of the Liber Bubonicus. Now, Skrolk's version of the Liber Bubonicus is the most powerful that comes to the battlefield because he carries a whole fucking book that is one of the volumes of the really, really big one.
Yeah. Plus, his one apparently also contains the parts of the original book that was stolen however many centuries ago from Nurgle. And as I recall, the Liber Bubonicus, the big one, has scribed by multiple sources. We've got Vermin Lords who have definitely been responsible for scribing.
Yes, which I saw chat say something.
Vermilanx. If he's out there anywhere. Vermilanx the Corrupt. He wrote parts of it. Other people wrote parts of it. But to make it even more confusing, the good old Liber Bubonicus is also extracted from to create warp scrolls, which are carried by the plague priests. But many of the models carry big, long scrolls, and these are created using, of course, warp ink. Because what the hell else are you going to call it? Warpstone ink. And they use their warpstone ink on living hides. Okay, so they've got to be alive when they scroll it onto their hide. Then they flay the skin off the living thing to create their scrolls. And these are copies from the original Liber Bubonicus. So when they all get together, they do their big thing when they're saying, I've learned this new disease, squeak, squeak, and then adding it to the Liber Bubonicus, the big one. They then copy out all the best bits and they run off with their warp scrolls. And somehow, amongst all of this morass of different books of woe and books of Liber Bubonicus, and the fact that it's a weak reference to Lothar Bubonicus from the original Realms of Chaos book, amongst all of this, Skrolk has got one of the big books, possibly, the original book, possibly, just a fucking copy, possibly, just his version, possibly. What's certain is it gives them some pretty fucking good spells.
Yes. Omnicide also, yes. Yeah. It's the toilet paper version of the Damaskron. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now so one thing you brought up that I want to talk about just for a very, very brief moment is you brought up Vermalanx. So for those unaware, Vermalanx the Corruptor is awesome character. He's a great character. He is a Vermin Lord Corruptor, which are so in the end times, one of the really cool things they did in the end times is that the Vermin Lords got very heavily developed, and we got different versions of Vermin Lords. Where you have the Vermin Lord Corruptor, which is the Clan Pestilens version, so it's a Vermin Lord of Disease, and then there's like the sneaky one, which is very Claneshian. There's the very fighty one, which is the Warlord version. But anyway, Vermalanx is the big bad of the named Vermin Lords, next to only Screech Vermin King, who's like the biggest, baddest one. And Vermalanx is the most he's the most powerful disease entity that the Great Horned Rat has. What someone in chat said that I fucking love, and it would explain so much, is that what's revealed in the end times that I like a lot is that the Vermin Lords are basically demon princes. They are Skaven, who the Great Horned Rat has been impressed enough with that he grants them demonhood and they become Vermin Lords. With Screech Vermin King literally being an entire Council of 13, which is fucking hilarious. Vermalanx, someone in chat noted that I actually think is 100% accurate, is probably the first Nurglitch.
Probably first Nurglitch, yes. I have long behind the scenes thought this.
Yeah, which would explain why in the end times he is so fucking buddy with Skrolk. He is immensely, like, he goes out of his way to save Skrolk from Krokar just beating the shit out of that poor rat.
And I would go further and say that provides us with another relatively weak, but definitely solid piece of foundation for suggesting that Skrolk and the original Nurglitch are the two that met way back in time.
Adding more cards to the stack.
It is adding more cards to that stack. Yeah, totally. So I think that loosely gives us a relatively clear timeline to go right back to what started us off in all of this for when Skrolk first did the deed and became Lord Skrolk and not just Skrolk the Plague Priest. And we're probably talking approximately 1,500, 600 years ago. Approximately. Yep. And he has been working his way up in through the ranks of Skavendom and reached as high as he is willing to go until he has done everything that he feels he has to do for the Horned Rat. And as far as he's concerned, I think it's fair to say he has yet to do the big thing that allows him to be anything close to a reflection of Nurglitch that came before him. He could never take the name himself because Nurglitch should have that name.
Yes. So that oh, we lost Andy. Oh no, Andy, no. He'll be back in a second. He'll be back. Nurglitch.
Nurglitch! He took me!
Your mic. There you are. I was going to say, the disease got him.
Me away.
He was talking too much about the Liber. He said Liber Bubonicus too many times.
I did. Liber Bubonicus. Ah, you appeared behind me and whisked me off.
Oh, that's super fun. No, Vermalanx, not Vermalite, but yes, it does sound like something the Brits would eat, or the Australians.
Or the Australians, yeah.
So,
Vegemite.
One of the things we're talking about Skrolk as far as physical capabilities are concerned. So we've talked about the Liber Bubonicus. It's that big book he carries on his back. If you're looking at his Total War model, or the one that he's holding in his hand, if you're looking at his little tabletop mini, which it's a hilarious book. It's devastating. The Total War version. I just want to make a quick note. This is not lore accurate, but I find it really funny. Is that so? What the Liber Bubonicus does, as Andy was talking about, is you write down diseases in it. Like you record diseases, their effects, how to create them, if they're magical, what kind of like ritual has to be performed, and it also contains a lot of spells. One of the things that I thought was clever about the Lord Skrolk betrayal in the Lustria book, which we'll get to more dramatically in a minute, is that they actually have a note that because Skrolk is so horrifically ancient and he knows just a fuck ton of spells, because they give him a ridiculous amount of spells, that he actually has trouble remembering all of them. So if he has to have the Liber Bubonicus to be able to cast them without like a small penalty, because he tends to forget them because he's just that old, which I thought was actually kind of, it's an endearing quality for a villain. But what's interesting about Skrolk is that he does the other thing that he carries. He's got the rod of corruption. The Rod of Corruption, which interestingly is very particularly noted to be made out of spiderwood.
Spiderwood.
Yeah, and then has
they just repeat that one again
like,
and again. Copy paste. We've got a detail. It's made of spiderwood. Let's copy that.
We don't fucking know, but apparently it's a really nasty tree, whatever it
and
is.
It's really important.
Yeah.
That was something that I remember laughing about 15 years ago, not long after the Children of the Horned Rat was released. And I was going to do like an entire thing about spiderwood as a small article because no one had. It's just a thing.
Yeah, apparently, if you're making magical diseases, it is the goat shit. Spiderwood. But anyway, but he it's a flail that has these bunch of iron balls on the end, like a big plague sensor. And the way Skaven make their plague sensors, I love it. It's fucking genius and it's gross. Which is that they have these big iron balls that they open them up and they put in a single shard of warpstone. And then they close it up. They write a bunch of awful runes of plague and ruination and horned rat goodies all over it. And then they go to the cauldrons of 1,000 poxes, which I want that in Total War so bad. I love the tabletop mini. It was gorgeous. But the Cauldron of 1,000 Poxes, exactly what it sounds like. It's a giant cauldron that they sometimes take on the battlefield where they stew up just all kinds of diseases. It's got lots of diseases ready to go at any time, and they ladle it like a soup over each of these little iron balls, and it causes the runes to flare up, and it makes the warpstone burn, which, like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
like warpstone burning just because of like how virulent the disease is. That is nuts.
Yeah, it's a fine weapon too. I have killed many people with that army because I freaking love Skrolk because he kicked ass. On that, we haven't really described Skrolk himself, which I think is worth doing.
Take it away.
Skrolk is not your typical plague priest. He's still a plague priest in that he's riddled with all those poxes and horrific buboes and swellings and broken bits of diseases across him. But he's much more. We need to consider Skrolk to be more the Mr. Burns from The Simpsons of Skaven. In that he's exceedingly ancient and he's filled with so many different diseases. They've all sort of counteracted each other into this weird equilibrium, meaning that he can just take on more and more and more to the point that he has the epithet, the disease that walks. None can stand his presence except for other members of Clan Pestilens, and even they find him a bit much. Any Skaven that get too close to him will die. Yep. Anyone who gets too close to him will die. He's one of those characters that if you put him on the battlefield and actually think of the ramifications of facing him, pretty much you're gonna die because he is filled with every disease that there is. It's not good. It's a little bit like those crazy Nurgle characters that you sometimes get, and you're like, wait a minute, if this actually happened in reality, you couldn't fight them. You actually couldn't fight them because you just die, regardless of the outcome of the battle. Skrolk is that guy. He's this old, decrepit, bent over, broken Skaven who tore out his eyes centuries ago. They weep horrible, blistered, weeping sores. And he can still, as we noted right at near the beginning of this stream, see, because he can see everything that's been influenced around him, because he is surrounded by a miasma of his own plagues and the plagues that have extended out from him as the various infections have gone. There's a suggestion in more than one place that he could see potentially hundreds of miles away if someone was carrying one of his plagues. It would suggest that if he was responsible for the Black Plague, just think of what that could mean in terms of his vision when he was in the Empire at that point.
Yeah, when he was at
all of those around him who had been sunk through the Black Plague, and he's loosely aware of each and every last living soul with it, what's around them, what's going them, is he himself, this blind seer, this walking prophet of the Horned Rat, who is going from city to city, tearing it down. He's pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, and his body is, like Andy said, it's grotesque of that. Like his roads
He
are all...
causes terror. He's as bad as the greater demon of Tzeentch. He's as bad as the greater demon of Nurgle. An enormous fuck-off dragon, 4 miles long, comes from the sky, lands beside you, and you go, yep, that's impressive. I'm as scared of you as I am of that.
Yeah, what to put into perspective how ugly his miasma is that a normal person could see it, because there's an aura around him where everything dies. Plants just rot, decay, die. Animals just collapse. They know there are no flies around Lord Skrolk because they can't survive the aura. Like, the only parasites that he has on his body are ones that are magically induced, because they have to be able to survive the environment that is his body.
And that's something that you've really got to get into your head if you compare Skrolk to, say, Nurgle. Nurgle is about life gone wrong. Really wrong. It's jade magic, going back to our original stream about the winds of magic. The jade magic gone overripe as everything swells and the disease becomes virulent and spreads. Skrolk is not that guy. Skrolk carries these diseases and you will die. If you come close to him, you're dead. Where with Nurgle, you're more likely to come away with horrible whispering diseases, attempting to get you to switch over to the chaos way of thinking.
Yeah. Nurgle's not gonna give you a disease that will make you rot away until you hopefully become a plague bearer. No, you're just gonna die. If Skrolk goes in Nurgle's cauldron, what happens? It's gonna be the Grom situation, I think. Either Skrolk wins or the cauldron wins. It's probably gonna be the cauldron, to be fair. But like, it would just kind of be a race.
I think this actually speaks to a slightly different story, and that is, if you're not going to kill Skrolk in the end times, what do you do with him? And I think the correct answer is either your story is to do with the horned rat or your story is to do with disease in particular. One way, for example, to take him down would be to show how incorrect he was about disease and its point, and chaos wins the day. You've got to remember that the end times is about chaos winning, which means the Skaven lose. And that would be one way of showing Nurgle's dominance. The very diseases that he's been attempting to master over all the centuries finally eat him away or make him fall to chaos, which would be terrible for a religious character, or something else. Ultimately, Nurgle's cauldron represents something that's quite beyond where Skrolk lies. So the answer would be, what happens? He either converts or he dies. Probably.
Yeah, for those curious, I'll just give the very briefest of rundowns because it'll inevitably be someone being like, what did happen to Skrolk in the end times? Long story short, he leads the invasion of Lustria. Like, he's in charge of that half of the world. He is super fucking important.
He's the Grimgor.
Yeah, he leads the first invasion. They lose. He leads the second invasion. They kind of win, but that's when the moon gets blown up. In the big epic final battle, he summons Vermalanx. Vermalanx helps him finally defeat Tehennwyn. So Tehennwyn loses to Lord Skrolk and Vermalanx because Tehennwyn relies on ambush warfare, and Vermalanx is like, all right, fuck this, and unleashed a disease that just killed the jungle. So you can't ambush if there's no trees. So Tehennwyn has to retreat. And then the big epic final fight, Kroq-Gar, who's one of this, from a lore perspective, he may just look like a dude that fights. Kroq-Gar is fucking terrifying. Like, he is ridiculous. I can't even put into words how stupidly strong he is for a character that doesn't use magic. But anyway, him and Skrolk have their big epic final battle. Skrolk kills Grimlock, a Carnosaur that is almost 10,000 years old, if not over that, in one hit. He bops him with the Rod of Corruption, and Grimlock literally shrivels up into like a raisin instantly. That's how horribly diseased Skrolk is. He fights Kroq-Gar. He almost wins. He hits Kroq-Gar with a bunch of disease. Kroq-Gar goes down, but Kroq-Gar, the Hand of the Gods, which is an really stupid OP Old One artifact, it kind of kicks into maximum gear, and Kroq-Gar literally just like burns with the light of the Old Ones themselves, and Skrolk goes genuinely blind because his disease gets burned away by the purifying energy of the Old Ones. And then Kroq-Gar literally impales him on a stick and waves him up in the air and waves him around a little bit. Vermalanx comes out, attacks Kroq-Gar. Kroq-Gar gets knocked back, and Vermalanx grabs Skrolk, starts healing him, and then jumps into the realm of ruin, which is the Great Horned Rat's personal dimension. And that's the last we see of him. We actually don't know what happened to Skrolk in the end.
And in some respects, I feel that was somewhat of a waste, because using Skrolk as a representation for everything Pestilens had done down there is not necessarily the best use of the character. They could have used almost anyone to do that, but I did like it because Skrolk was finally given at least something to do. It was nice.
Yeah, and where is he in AOS? We don't know. He's either dead or hibernating, or who knows.
Hey, Matthew, who is a worse affront to nature, Skrolk, Morger, or Gelt? I will say that Skrolk isn't an affront to nature at all. Indeed,
Morger, easily.
I mean, Skrolk is just, disease is not against nature. Disease is a part of nature. Skrolk is just manipulating and using nature to his own devices, and using disease towards an end and on behalf of his god. So I would argue there that the answer is clearly Gelt.
I will say, if you changed your wording to what worse affront to life, I would say Skrolk. Nature, though, not so much, because death is a part of life, or death is a part of nature. It's just the way it goes. The real Black Death killed something like 30 to 50% of the population in Europe. Do we have any numbers for the old world? Yes, Andy, let him have it.
Loosely speaking, depending on where you are, as many as 9 and 10. It was almost 90% in most places. It was actually awful. There is a couple of different versions, because as often is the case with Warhammer writers, whatever came before, they tried to add +1. So what may have started as this character is one of the better characters turns into the best character, turns into the only one that can do this, turns into is a representation of God on Earth and all the winds of magic, and is amazing. And somewhat similarly, the Black Death, which was originally just a reference to real world Black Death and had largely exactly the same ramifications, got scaled up, then was laid at the Skaven's hand, which it hadn't been previously, or should I say at the Skaven's paw, and then was scaled up again in later writing to have been utterly devastating. You'll find that each writer takes it slightly differently, but loosely, most of the numbers behind the scenes were about 90% in most places, unless there was a reason not to.
Yeah, keep in mind, the Skaven literally enslaved what was left of the Empire, except for like Sylvania, because Sylvania had the undead, and the Lorelorn elves were helping out around like Middenheim and stuff.
It was one of the biggest failures, you could argue, of the Empire, and very few other invasions of the Empire have been as successful as that invasion. The fact that it failed was laid largely down in the hands of one individual, and a certain amount of good old magic and divine magic and all the rest of it. It's the Warhammer world. There's always going to be an influence of that, and of course the Skaven backbiting and stabbing each other in the back. Hey, Laughing God!
Did Skrolk ever face off against a prominent Nurgle worshiper or demon? I feel like it's a missed opportunity for him not to have faced off against someone that or have a rivalry with a demon over the years.
I agree.
Yeah. Oh God, I want to say the answer is yes, but I can't remember a specific. There might be a reference in the first Thanquol and Bone Ripper book, because there are some chaosy dudes that are running around in that book.
You make me doubt it. I can't recall it, but you might be right. But I would be looking for I was 1,000 times more evil than thee moment from the demon, who would see the almost prosaic nature of the disease manipulation on behalf of the Skaven as the dabblings of a neophyte who didn't truly understand. And there is that moment where chaos, particularly because chaos does become ascendant, that really should have nailed it home that the Skaven were, for all they were doing their own thing, became a tool of the destruction of the world at the hands of chaos. And it would have been lovely to have that moment of the Skaven being wrong in a very different way, and in their ascendancy, in their inheritance, it all going a bit wrong. There's a lovely story in there somewhere that could have been teased out, and it would have been beautiful if there'd been foreshadowing for that by having some form of rivalry, some form of issue, alliance, sometimes enmity, other times, that could then have turned into, yeah, well, I was playing you all along, slap. There's definitely something there that could have been good, but it didn't happen, so there's no point
I think
dwelling.
Yeah, I think there would have been something fun to have had, like an alliance between the likes of Dr. Festus and Lord Skrolk, where they're trying to manipulate one another for what the end of the disease is going to be, as they're trying to make a super disease. And just as Skrolk probably manages to pull one over on Festus and gets the upper hand and thinks he's going to win, Kugoth Plaguefather shows up. And you have this character that goes, no, let me show you just how far this can go. And that would be a critical moment for Skrolk. Now, whether he would die there or whether he would do something interesting, because Skaven are very interesting characters, play around with that in your head.
Yeah, I mean, upon thinking upon it, if we're dealing with a plague priest whose core raison d'etre is to understand, manipulate, and use disease, ultimately, the demons of Nurgle are a core source of this. He is a sorcerer. I quite like the idea of having him being in contact with demons, trapped demons, captured demons over the course of time, and them being underneath that magic, controlled at least on the surface, but ultimately behind the scenes over the centuries, working towards twisting them to a different view, a different way of doing things that would allow it to do its thing at the end. That doesn't mean that the faith was misplaced in the Horned Rat, or that the Horned Rat's use of disease is in any way related to Nurgle. It's just a method of showing how chaos is insidious and works into everything. And it would have been nice to do that. And using the Skavens need to enslave, the Skavens need to take their ruination in general, and using that against Skrolk would have been, I think, a fun story to potentially be told.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's definitely something in there that if they ever decided to just Marvel reset it all, you could tell a pretty freaking amazing.
If you
story.
ever use Skrolk as the big bad in your campaign, that would be a fun idea to play around with as a potential villain that is lurking in the background, depending on how your players are dealing with things. Yeah, Rip Grimlock, he was the best. We miss him every day. Let's see, Czar94. Do we have any idea how big number-wise Clan Pestilens is compared to the other clans? Sotek, are you doing a Christmas charity stream again this year? I don't know yet. Maybe. But in answer to the first question, fucking huge. Clan Pestilens is canonically the largest clan when it comes to themselves and the clans they control. Yeah. Like, Clan Scurries, Molder, and Eshin are not very populous compared to Pestilens. Pestilens is a faith. It's not just a clan. It's something so much nastier and bigger, which is why the other clans kind of hate them so fucking much, because there's there's such a pain in the ass to deal with. But when it comes to pure numbers, like next to only certain warlord clans, Clan Pestilens is easily the most populous of the four great clans.
Yeah, easily. I have nothing to contradict or add to that beyond, remember, this is the clan that rules the Southlands.
Yeah,
that rules enormous chunks of elsewhere as well, with bits of Lustria, bits of here, bits of there. They are big. When you consider the other clans are often not ruling these other locations at all. And I think that Sotek largely nails one of the primary reasons why. They are not just a clan. They are an entire faith, an entire way of dealing with the Horned Rat and expressing the Horned Rat's will on the world. Consider it like, if you want to look at other game settings, look at, say, Dragon Age, where you've got the Qun. The Qun is one of the religions of that world that's represented by one species, and everyone always thinks of that species when they think of the Qun, until it's explained through the course of the game. All the other species are wrapped up in that, and their entire empire includes everybody, all following the faith. And in many respects, Clan Pestilens is much more than a clan; it's a faith. Also, can I just say, thanks very much. $50.
Yeah, thank you, very, very generous. Thank you so much. Hammond, I have an idea for that as we get closer to Christmas. Laughing
for those of you who don't know, Hammond did an epic rap battle between me and Gelt. It's out there somewhere.
It's very impressive. It's uncanny and impressive. I'll be doing something with that closer to Christmas. Laughing God, a good old pox off, if you will. Yes, yes, the good old church pox off. Together.
And for those of you out there who know your Michael Moorcock stuff, there's a lovely little bit at the end of Elric's stories, which I will drop down. Elric has effectively wiped out the Chaos Gods. This is where Games Workshop drew lots of its inspiration. And the tool that he used to do this is shown to be working towards its own ends. And in many respects, that's kind of how I can see disease and pestilence. It's working towards its own ends. And that's Nurgle. You've got to remember, Nurgle is more than just a chaos god. Nurgle is quite literally disease. they are using Nurgle. And ultimately, that's about, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Ask the Wizards of the Empire. They're using
I was going to say, no more than a wizard using magic or
exactly.
a warrior killing people in a fight.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
That's what sucks about chaos. It's kind of ubiquitous. It's hard to get around it.
Quite.
That's why the lizardmen are like, oh, you racists not doing shit. Anyway, like the most recent episode of LAWhammer, not the Alamanowith one, but the one before that, has a whole big awesome tangent about wizards trying to defeat chaos by using magic, which is technically chaos. Like, by fighting it, you're making it worse.
It's a big complicated thing, isn't it? The Warhammer world is a tough place to negotiate.
I'm going to defeat this fire by lighting everything else on fire around it.
But you know, as we all know, that can work. You starve oxygen towards the fire, and it's So let's give it a go, eh? We definitely won't mutate.
We won't burn everything down and die horribly. Nah, it's fine. All right, so we talked a lot about we got off on a hell of a tangent there from Skrolk's.
We really did. I kind of lost track of where we were now.
Yeah, so we were talking about Skrolk's physical design and stuff.
Yes.
One of the things I do love about Skrolk design wise is a lot of people note that he walks with a big hunch. And they're like, oh, it's because he's super old. Not entirely. The way Skrolk's diseases have gone to such a point, he has a mound on his back. And it's literally described as being like scabs on top of pustules, on top of pimples, on top of buboes. Like, it's just a stack of just, that literally sways. And there's a note. They never explore this. And I'm kind of glad they didn't, because the horror is better in the unknown. That when Skrolk is moving around or holding still, you can see things moving under his cowl. Like something that's big enough that it's like you can see the motion, which, like, does he have other limbs? Does he have like some kind of horrible parasite that lives in his body? Does he have something that could, a tentacle or something that could pop out and attack you if you attacked him? Like,
or is it just his own body eating itself?
Yeah, like,
you know, the quite literal manifestation of cancers and the worst of it. All right, so given the hour, I think we're going to have to eventually turn to controversy.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And we're going to have to do it.
This
is something we've been avoiding, but inevitably controversy is going to fall upon this stream. And I fear it is about to arrive.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about Skrolk that's super cool, he is one of, if not the fastest Skaven, next to like only Deathmaster Snitch. Like his reflexes. Normally you think Nurgle, you think, oh, they're fat, or disease, you think, oh, fat, slow, and super tough. No. Skrolk is tough and he is fast as fuck.
Go check that.
He is.
I did not notice that.
They note in his lore that he could catch flies by their wings if flies could be around him. Like he's freakishly fast is one of his gimmicks, which is so awesome because he's so old and diseased. And normally when you think Nurgle boys, you're like, oh, they're slow, but no, Skrolk's fast as fuck, boy.
Fast as any other. I mean, he's no Deathmaster Snick initiative 10, but he's still initiative 6.
Yeah, he's quite that. Which you wouldn't expect, which I like a lot about him. Anyway, so controversy stuff. So for those unaware, Cubicle 7 has inherited the mantle of
see what you did there.
Yeah, after it died. Andy Law was very heavily involved in a lot of that in the early stages.
It was.
But it is kind of continued to develop its own timeline in a sense, which general rule of thumb is whenever anything ever gets done Games Workshop wise, that particular publication, you might as well treat it as its own timeline. You take your favorite bits, throw out the rest, which we're about to get into. And they've released a lot of books. Some are great, some are not as great. Even within them, some have really cool parts, some parts are kind of it just depends. And what you like and what you don't like. But they released a Lustria book, which was a really fucking big deal because there had never, not in an age, been a good exploration of Lustria from like a role play perspective. And the book has a lot of really cool parts, and it has some parts that are a little interesting decision wise. And one of those revolves around Clan Pestilens. So in fantasy, kind of as I build up towards this, there is a general rule of thumb that people are going to have a lot of questions about how everything works. And you as an author can decide to just give them the answer, or you can choose to leave breadcrumbs that lead to an answer, or you can choose to leave a lot of little cracked open doors that lead to a lot of different places. Generally, Games Workshop has always run with the idea of the cracked door philosophy, which they talk about a lot if you ever talk to any of their writers, which is that you're supposed to give enough information that if you want to explore it later, you can, but you really try to want to avoid just like answer and the end.
Yeah. Let's give you a clear example of this just to make sure that we all get what we're talking about here. We had a previous stream about Myrmidia, goddess of war and strategy. And we discussed at some point the Monastery of the Dark Maiden that was inside one of the books. Now, I wrote that section, and in that section, there's an entire debacle about Myrmidia and who she was and where she came from. And this cult holds the answer. And this particular faction of the cult, the answer is quite clearly written on the page as, and they lost it. But it's still buried there if anyone wants to go find it, without actually providing the answer. Hints were laid. There was a whole bunch of words that were specifically chosen to give an idea of what was lying within it. But importantly, the answer was not spelt out in black and white, because to do so is to limit future writers, which is always a problem. You want to ensure that future writers have got the ability to write whatever they want inside particular areas to best suit the product at hand. So if you've got a previous edition that says the opposite, then you're just going to end up having to overwrite it, which upsets the fans because they're like, but wait a minute, you've just contradicted that previous bit of lore. And they're like, yeah, I have to make my game work. So yeah, go fuck yourself. Loosely, I wouldn't be the first writer to do that. Or alternatively, what bit of lore? I've never heard of that before because they didn't do their due diligence, their research. That also happens. So one of the ways to ensure that doesn't is to write very carefully about any fact and to provide any facts as in-game facts only. And by that, I mean, it's a belief of a character in the world. It's not necessarily true. People can believe crazy shit. Just look at the real world and all the crazy shit that people believe in it. And it's very easy for your flat earther out there to claim that they know the actual fact of the world. And it's the same in the Warhammer world. You can have characters who believe things, but you shouldn't state it from a God view that this is the answer. We have provided you the answer. Restricts future writers. And it's also just kind of less interesting because there's no longer these channels where we debate these things.
Yeah, and you'll note if you go back and like read second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or even most of the Warhammer Fantasy 4th edition books are pretty good about like, if they're going to give you a fact, it's from an in-character perspective. So you can be like, oh, well, maybe that's not true. Or maybe that person's just an idiot or whatever. But this book had a couple of weird things all over the place. Like this book introduced a vampire elf, which to my understanding is getting written out of the physical version because so many people were like, what the fuck is that? So it's getting like actually edited out of the book. But anyway, so
I'd just like to say that Mordenkin Crescent gets it. For example, some people think Gelt is a good character. See? Everything subjective views. That's fine.
Andy just hates people from the Border Princes. That's all this is. What's interesting is that, so in this book, just to cut to the quick of it, there is a section on Ketza, which is the defiled city, which is where Clan Pestilens, it was their birthplace. It's where the original Skaven that came to Lustria shacked up in the ruins of Ketza, which is important because Ketza was known as the Defiled before the Skaven got there. It was a Lizardman temple city that was predominantly destroyed by the demons of Nurgle. A big old demon host showed up and they unleashed a really powerful disease that killed all the defenders, and it made the city uninhabitable to the Lizardmen, and it's been left abandoned ever since, known as the Defiled. So the Skaven, that's where they move in because nobody's there. It's a ruin. And it's still like fairly functional and well constructed. So it made a very nice natural home for them. Unfortunately for them, it was also horribly diseased because of these Nurgle diseases, which led into a lot of their shenanigans. That's fine. That's great. The problem is that the book introduces a new character, which is that it breaks down. I make sure to pull up his page so I get his name right. But it has a breakdown of the city of Ketza, which has been flattened by Tedoeko's comet, but you can go into the Underwarrens, and it's kind of like a dungeon, very, very late game dungeon for your players.
Yep.
Now, what happens is there's a secret chamber in the very bottom of this dungeon where the final boss essentially lives. And this character is revealed to be an exalted herald of Nurgle by the name of Oath-Krichnak, which you'll note almost kind of sounds a little Skaven-y. And he's a giant, great, exalted herald of Nurgle, which exalted heralds are like, most of them are like roughly human size. This guy's like over 8 feet tall. Like he's fucking gigantic, even by herald standards. And what's revealed is that he's got really big horns, with one of his horns kind of having broken off, which you may see kind of where this might be going. But he sits on a throne because he was basically the general in charge of the demon army that attacked Ketza. And although they won, you know, that's when shit kind of slowly started to go awry. And then the whole vortex happened and all these shenanigans, and the demons get their asses kicked and start fading out of reality. So he looks around and goes, oh shit, okay, well, I'm gonna run down to the bottom of this place. And he physically like anchors himself into that place because he starts leeching off the geomantic web. He finds a way to kind of tap into it. And although the magic is very weird to him because it's not like the magic of the ether, which is fairly correct, he just kind of slowly just sips little tiny pieces of it to keep himself alive. I'm totally cool with all that. The problem is what happens next, which is that when the original Nurglitch comes to this city, the Skaven, they burrow down and they're getting all sick and stuff. And as they're burrowing down to the depths and they're getting horribly sick, Nurglitch and a group of his buddies discover Oath-Krichnak. And he wakes up and they start talking to each other and they make a deal, which is that he says,
no, don't say the word deal.
Yeah,
God damn it.
Deal. And he says, tell you what, Nurgle abandoned me here and I really hate my grandpappy and he's annoying. So tell you what, I will give you power. I will give you all of these things. I will make you resistant to disease. I will remake you in my image in exchange for you helping me out and protecting me here and making sure I get to eat a lot of this great warding stuff and go out and kill those lizardmen guys. And Nurglitch goes, cool. And that's the whole founding of the cult. Like the whole thing of like, whoa, why did the Great Horned Rat start doing disease? How did all this stuff happen? What did Nurglitch discover? They didn't. They found a demon in the bottom who they struck a bargain with, and he gave them all the answers immediately, and that's the end. And he basically hangs out down there, and Clan Pestilens knows he's down there, though only like the upper echelons are allowed to know about him because his existence kind of flies in the face of like the Great Horned Rat being responsible for giving them their blessings. And like Skrolk knows he's down there, and Skrolk talks to him, and they bring him like offerings and stuff, and kind of the end. Which in universe of the book they wrote, the illustrated book they work, doesn't make any fucking sense because there's still the Great Horned Rat does grant blessings of plague. He still has his own lore of magic. It's not like they're like, oh no, it's just the lore of Nurgle. No, there's still a Skaven lore of plague. The Skaven still have their own interpretation, but what they're suggesting is that the horned god, which that's what they say, is that Clan Pestilens worships the horned god, not the horned rat. And the horned god is this exalted demon of Nurgle who is basically Scarbrand. Like he's a pissed off demon of Nurgle who wants to break out and go kill Nurgle, which like, all right, we've already done this.
Right. So
it sucks.
I
go off, Andy. Go off, Andy.
I find this sort of lore intervention particularly difficult to discuss without heading deep into rant territory. It's one of the reasons why when I was brought on to do the current edition, for example, I had to turn back a lot of the ideas that were thrown at me because people were desperate to make their mark, to do a thing that redefined things. Now, what this fucking does, to put my stress on it quite clearly, is say that either A, the Horned Rat is a fucking idiot, and when the various folks who came up from Clan Pestilens touched it, he was like, yeah, you know what? I'm cool with you being a Chaos Worshipper. That's okay. That's cool with me. And you come there, Glitch. Or, and this is the worst part because there are many writers who believe this, the Horned Rat is Nurgle. And I cannot abide this. It makes the world smaller. It makes the world less interesting. It makes all of it all just chaos. Now, we all know that some writers write to that line, but that is not the official public-facing line. The public-facing line is all these other gods are actual fucking gods. The elves have got their own gods. Humans have got their own gods. All the various species have got their own little gods doing their own little things. The Aether and all of the divine realms, the realm of chaos and everything beyond is a super complicated big place. The Horned Rat has his own domain, the realm of ruin. It is over there. It is not the realm of Nurgle. It is something not just discrete. It's completely different and is marked as different in multiple publications. By adding this section in, they're saying, yeah, no, that's all wrong. For this to exist and be correct, the Horned Rat either has to be this, or the Horned Rat is stupid and just allows most of its species, because you could argue up to half of the Skaven are somehow attached to some, in one way or another, Clan Pestilens. Half of his divine creatures are lost to another god. It does not work well with anything else. And that's just the tip of an iceberg. And I'm feeling an urge to stop before I go on another rant.
So don't worry. I'm going to set you off on another rant in a second. Bro, Ricky Scotty, what if instead of the virulence of disease burning the warp stone and the plague sensors, it's instead much like a chemical reaction?
Yeah.
As the warping will, the Horned Rat's runes of disease and destruction seared to the warp stone. Yeah, that would be a much more accurate portrayal.
And I think that's 100% accurate. And thanks, Ricky Scotty. That was
very
really
generous.
Not just a good point, but that's super generous. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I agree completely. Largely, it's them creating their burning sensors, and it is not necessarily through the concept of just flame alone, although the heat may be generated through the chemical reactions. We've got to remember the Skaven are much more capable than many writers like to think of them. They are intelligent creatures, fiercely intelligent, and their intelligence and their intelligence is voraciously more capable than most of the human intelligence they often compare it with. You've got to remember, most Skaven don't last beyond the age of 10. Most don't get past 3. They are incredibly young creatures, and they get everything that they need. They learn everything at a ridiculous pace. They master it, perfect it, and die. And that, I think, when you combine it with a character like Lord Skrolk, tells you just how much of a depth and breadth of knowledge that it has and what it can do with those. And I did use it for him because he's a little bit beyond a him, probably.
I don't think he would have any recognizable him parts anymore. Mitch,
who knows? You never can be certain. Let's just not go down that route too much.
I'm so tempted to say some things, but we're going to move on. Mitch, thank you very much. I'm glad you could join us.
So look, you rock.
Count Sterling, can an ogre eat Skrolk and live? Probably not. The only ogre that I would say the only ogre that could do it would have to be an ogre that is very blessed by the Great Maw. Like there's a divine intervention protecting them from divine disease.
Yeah, it very likely die of diseases before it even got inside his mouth. Skrolk is that bad. Skrolk is one of those characters that makes a poor vehicle for most narratives, because to bring Skrolk into the room is to kill your characters.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I will say one of the best things about the Thankful and Bone Ripper trilogy, if you've never read it, for the love of God, go read it. It's so fucking hilarious. It's a comedy that's dark. Because there's always a human perspective, which shows how horrifying everything that's happening is. But it's also hilarious because almost every single Skaven special character shows up, because the only characters that can tolerate them are other Skaven special characters. So you get to see them just fucking with each other, and it's amazing. They screw with each other so much. Anyway, Hammond, it was Zinch all along. All our pawns are the great deceiver. Or is that Odin from God of War?
You know what? I don't think that's a bad comment. For all often your comments are ridiculous, Hammond, and that is in no way putting qualitative judgment on them. But I think in this particular case, Zinch wins. And that's something you've got to try and remember. Zinch wins, which means that every species across the world done fucked up. And that includes the Skaven. So I think that there is definitely a certain level of the Chaos Gods have won, and we should try to reflect that in the stories that we're telling with them. Unless, of course, you're playing in your own version of the fantasy roleplay world, like we currently are.
In which case, stick it to them.
Yeah, exactly. And the Warhammer world might survive another what would be world-ending event because of the
200 years. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Cole Patterson, what do you mean all the gods are Be'lakor and Ladriel? Yeah. Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, basically.
That's all it really is. It's just Be'lakor and Ladriel playing chess. Yeah, so just to be clear, because sometimes when I say stuff like this or it gets brought up, I'm sure there's someone that's like, oh, I'm sure he's exaggerating or whatever. I'm going to read a direct quote. It's just a paragraph, very short. I'm just going to read a direct quote to kind of do the
to introduce this. I would like to say, are you all ready for story time with the Loremaster of Sotek?
Yes. I also want to say, A, I think there's a really easy way to salvage this story into something that fits and works really well, which we're going to do. And B, this is not an attack on the author, even though I think he fucked up with this particular story, but hey, it happens. We're all human.
We're all human. Right. It happens.
Yeah. So
that's why you have editors.
Yeah. So it says this, so stories shared between the Plague Lords of Clan Pestilens say the following. When the final remaining Ratmen lurched into the caverns to regroup beneath Ketsa, so these are the first Skaven that came to Lustria, and they're just having a bad time. They're having a terrible time. So it's the final survivors of that first group. They instead encountered a horror in the depths beneath Ketsa. Inside a previously undiscovered, filth-ridden throne chamber rested a corpulent demon marked with the same weeping sores, foul stench, and bulbous lesions that mutilated their own bodies. It is said that the leader of these rat men, desperate to save their vile hides, promised what remained of his clan to the demon and its master, who they proclaimed as the Horned One, and embraced the plagues that had so thoroughly decimated him and his kinsmen. In that day, those Skaven truly became Clan Pestilens, bringers of plague, disease, and filth. From that moment, Clan Pestilens gained strength in number and in power under supervision of their demonic master, and in exchange for secret knowledge of illness and disease, they redirected strands of the geomantic web below the ground into the demon's chamber, providing it with direct access to the energies of the old ones. What? What? Like, they're Skaven. They would have backstabbed the shit out of this guy.
Yeah.
They've been loyal for 2,600 years?
Now, if they had persecuted it, torn it to shreds, got that demon begging for its existence, tearing it to shreds so that they themselves can survive, rats eating rats upon rats, I could see that. I could see them using it and the demon then trying to use them in turn. That would make, I think, a more compelling story and a story that would match the moment. But just saying, you know what? Let's bow down to you. Fuck the Horned Rat. We're bowing down to you. This is great. Fuck that. I don't like it. I think it is a poor example of how the setting could be represented. But in particular, in many respects, it weakens the whole concept of disease. And by that, I mean, we don't say that Ulrich is corn. We don't say that Cain is corn.
Yeah, please, God, don't do that. There are people that do it.
And now there are writers who have tried, and that's why I was brought on to do the job with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It was when a writer came up to me and said, hey, that's just this, isn't it? To go, no, that's not Warhammer. Stop writing that. But I think it's cool. Cool. Use it in your own game, but that's not what Warhammer is about. And in respect here, you just have this moment where you look at it and you go, you've just ruined the Horned Rat. If this is true, the Horned Rat is either just Nurgle, or the Horned Rat can't tell when half his species has gone and doesn't do anything. The Horned Rat literally threw down a giant pillar and said, this is the rules you abide by. Touch this and you're mine. No, because to this day, apparently, there's a Nurgle demon down there who says, hey, Clan Pestilens are just mine. Yeah. Get out of it.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that little bit of lore writing feels so much like someone looked at the kind of like how we talked about earlier with people asking questions about, what's the relationship between Nurgle and Clan Pestilens, of seeing that surface level interaction and going, oh, well, these must be the same thing, and not looking at any of the broader context.
It's exactly that.
Because like the whole concept, which I find it weird that Games Workshop even approved this, because it flies in the face of what they've done in Age of Sigmar, where they've drawn a huge difference in line between the Great Horned Rat as the god of plague and Nurgle as the god of disease and pestilence. There is a distinct difference between them, and they hate each other for it. We're like, Age of Sigmar, one of the coolest things, I know Andy might not necessarily be a fan of this, but the Great Horned Rat joined the Chaos Pantheon because Slaanesh got kicked off for a bit and because he got captured, and everyone was like, oh shit, well, there's a 4th empty seat. And the Great Horned Rat was like, well, I'm here. I'll just inherit this seat. Not a big deal. I'll just mosey my ass up there. And like all the other gods hate him, and it's fucking hilarious. Like, I love that they all hate him so much and they begrudgingly have to deal with him. But his interactions with Nurgle are very well talked about of why they don't like each other. And this story just shits all over that. Like, it just messes it up because it's like, oh, well, they're the same thing. It's like, what?
It for me is as close to a travesty in terms of a piece of writing as you can get, because it's then juxtaposed against a whole bunch of other sections which is really nicely crafted and well thought out. And when you get that, you're just left going, yeah, but do you realize what you've written? Do you realize with this cool little thing that you think you've done to squirrel away down there and go, I've answered this, you've actually completely undermined an entire species and faction in the Warhammer world by the implications of what you've done. And you've set it up in a way that is, if it's true, and it's written as if it is true, and it's not and it might have been this, it might have been that. The fucking demon is there, and it's still doing the demon thing, and the people are still talking to it.
It's a god perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's just like, this is what happened.
And that being the case, it's a complete mess up of the lore in a way that just leaves me going, why would you do that? It could have been written in 100 different ways that could have still had the same. But does that mean the Horned Rat is just Nurgle? Ooh, rather than just saying the Horned Rat is Nurgle or the Horned Rat's a complete idiot. Neither of which is at all acceptable as an outcome, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Mornington Crescent, thank you for that. And you are not wrong. Like, who's to say Screech Vermin King wasn't around back then in some way, shape, or form?
And I think that
tricky motherfuckers.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of thing that most writers don't really comprehend because they don't know the greater depth of the Warhammer lore. What they know is the surface stuff that they themselves like and have engaged with, and they don't know the rest. So they just write a story around the bits they like, not realizing that they're perhaps making massive contradictions to the rest of the lore, or just missing out something that should happen. Like, if the Horned Rat is a real god, then the Horned Rat's minions, even before the Horned Rat even existed, would almost certainly be rising out and whispering to the early Skaven and giving them directions. There is a host of other ways to deal with a Nurgle demon in that area, which I'm cool with. I'm not just cool with it. It makes sense. I think it's awesome. I don't in any way think having a big, nasty Nurgle demon down there that's pissed off is a bad story. I think that's a great story. I just think saying that the Horned Rat is that demon, or that somehow the Horned Rat doesn't know that Clan Pestilens has fallen, is daft.
Yep, and I'm going to come back to that after these super chats. Laughing God, the way I would use this is Skaven and the Great Horned Rat look at all the plague goodness and went, yeah, we'll be taking this, and gave this demon the 2-finger salute. Yeah, essentially. Come back to that after this other super chat real quick from Laughing God again. Oh, this guy could be Skrolk / the clan rival, and every time he manifests, they feel the need to go put him down. So what I was going
that
on those
sort
lines,
of story, yeah.
Yeah, what Andy said earlier, the idea that Clan Pestilens stole these secrets or brutally tortured them out of this demon. Like, they find this demon who has found a kind of clever way to keep himself trapped in reality. This demon does not like Nurgle, and maybe he knows if he goes back, it's not going to be good. Like, when grandfather sees him, it's not going to be a happy reunion. And he is so desperate to stay in the mortal realm. And the first Nurglitch sees this demon and goes, oh, you don't want to die? Well, let's have a chat, and just tortures him for decades, just slowly ripping out all these secrets in exchange for not finishing him off.
And think of the actual psychology behind that. We're dealing with the Skaven leader who's led their clan underneath the oceans, has arrived here, and they are dying in droves. And then they find out why. The influence of this demon has killed their people. This Nurglitch is not just going to be vengeful. He is going to be rage-filled. because the diseases that they've been exposed to is going to be their downfall, but can also be, well, useful. The horned rat, after all, needs to ruin, and what they've gone through has ruined them. And they've got a logical process here for the
It's such a perfect encapsulation of like what would make Nurglitch so unique is that for most people, if you found the horrible cause of the disease down the basement, you'd go, oh, we're going to burn this out with fire and kill it. We may die, but at least we've dealt with this. But the Skaven, Nurglitch looks at his clan and goes, this completely and utterly eradicated my clan, and there was nothing we could do against it. It was an invisible foe. What a horrifying weapon. I want this weapon.
Yes.
And he takes it. And the Hound Rat goes, you get it. You understand.
I'm going to bring this comment up because I think it perfectly encapsulates the problem. How do you do it? And I think that is a fascinating question that doesn't necessarily require an answer, but the answer is that they succeeded.
Yeah.
That they did it.
Skaven could figure that out. They're
Skaven are sharp as fuck. If there's a way to do a thing, they'll find a way to do it. And yes, from the outside, we'd look on and say, well, that's precarious and stupid. Who the fuck would ever do that? Skaven are gamblers because their lives are already short anyway. In the same way that elves look at humans and see them as fast-living gamblers.
You know what? It would fit so perfect with Nurglitch's character too. Like, I know we're talking about Skrolk, but they're so intertwined. It would fit so well with Skrolk because it plays into his whole gamble of like when he went to the Council of 13 and was like, I have this disease. If you kill me, we all die. Of him sitting there above this demon and saying, you're going to help me. And if you kill me, which you could, you've clearly demonstrated you could kill us with disease. But if you don't help me and I die, you die too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And we've got a story there. And it's a story that's so close to the surface that it's almost hinted at. That's the biggest thing that I have issue with in terms of the Lustrian book presentation is that the story is almost cool. And I don't just mean cool as in it works with the setting. I mean, holy shit, this is a cool story. I like this. I'm actually quite engaged. And it was literally like 5 sentences away from being one of the best pieces of writing for the Skaven that had come out. But instead, it ended up landing flat in its face by effectively saying, Skaven are stupid and they're just chaos worshippers. And that was, for me, a complete undermining of what the Skaven are. The Skaven just aren't that. If they were, I feel the rant coming on again.
Yeah, it would have made for such a good exploration of what the relationship between the Skaven and the Great Horned Rat is.
Yeah,
they have an opportunity for a Skaven even though the Skaven aren't necessarily the best record keepers of legends being passed down from these plague lords of what it was like for Nurglitch to experience the Great Horned Rat's approval of discovering this new method of war, of the Great Horned Rat going, yes, I am going to use this as a weapon, and you're going to write down all these secrets in these books so that I know them, and I'm going to get stronger, so I'm going to make you stronger because you're doing a good job.
And the Liber Bubonicus now makes sense because the demon tells them where it is. They go running up north. They capture it. They take the Liber Bubonicus back. They study the disease. They understand that disease. That's the very book that Skrolk
he literally
still fucking carries that first book. That's the one that Skrolk supposedly still carried, although it got turned into one of the many other books at a later date. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, at heart, there's a beautiful story just on the tip of the tongue, but they bit it back.
Yeah. So, but it does allow for some really interesting kind of mental exercises of that. If I were running it, it does not take a lot of edits to make something really cool out of it. Other than make sure you edit the profiles as well, because unfortunately C7 does not know how to make good NPC profiles. If you fight this villain, you will kill him hilariously fast.
After doing this stream, it almost makes me want to do a Lord Skrolk character because he would be horrendous. Imagine how powerful it'd be. Stats would be in the hundreds. He'd be so old.
Oh, for Skrolk?
So, yeah.
Oh, you don't want to use the provided one in the Lustria book?
I do not, because they would be beaten by an average 3-month-old PC, which makes no sense at all.
But Andy, he's got a toughness of 75. And he's
I've got a PC with a toughness of almost that.
Wounds.
Nah, my Skrolk would probably have a toughness of about 400 or 500 or something.
He's got 33 wounds. How could they possibly kill
Is that
him?
all? Holy shit balls. I have the Dr. Flaster. I don't know if anyone watches my campaign, but I've got a doctor, just a normal woman, Dr. Flaster. She's got over 50 wounds. That is ridiculous.
She could beat Lord Skrolk in a fight, probably.
That's actually ridiculous. Holy shit balls. I didn't realize that, having not read the stats. Man, yeah, I would probably have a very different version of Skrolk. Half tempted to do it, but I don't want to challenge Cubicle 7's versions. Never really want to do that. They can do their own thing. I don't want to say, this is how it should be. Bollocks.
You could just do like this is the LAWhammer version. Of like, yeah, like I don't think most people, because most people are probably just going to use the book version because it's right there. But anyway, so Hammond, imagine saying installed into Lair the same people or that Gelt could use priestly powers, lol.
I'm not entirely sure with that comment, but that was answering something we were discussing earlier, so I've actually lost track of what I'm. So I'll just say, yeah, sure. All right, look at the time. I think we're going to need to get to our questions. Yes. As Sotek goes and runs off and takes a quick look at the questions, let me do a quick summary and say that Lord Skrolk is one of the most fascinating Skaven characters that has never been written. And by that, I mean so much awesome is wrapped up in what this character represents, but so very little of it has actually been expressed black and white in the text. What's actually happened is that he's been copy-pasted multiple times into different books, and then a couple of authors have tried to write him further without any real thought as to all the things that Skrolk might have done and what his character would thus be. I think through the course of this stream, we've had a good opportunity to examine some of the character traits that Skrolk might have, doesn't necessarily have. Another writer might come along later and say, actually, Skrolk is this. And that's cool. That's one of the great joys of Warhammer. Might I also conclude and say, if you have not yet pressed like, please do press like if you're on YouTube. Please subscribe as well. We are currently on Sotek's channels. That means if you have not subscribed, what are you even doing watching Lorebeards? You're meant to subscribe, for goodness sake. So go press that subscribe button. Sotek needs you. It is your call to action. And as is always the case, next week we will be on my channel, and that will be next Sunday for my birthday stream channel. Well, that's gonna be fun. Where we are going to discuss. Well, we'll find out. Sotek and I'll discuss it afterwards. I reserve the right after the vote to say "fuck you all." For my birthday present, I'm doing the one I want to do.
I like how
we're aware of that.
I like how that kind of implies you're giving them the option to vote, even though there's not really a vote.
There'll be a vote.
You're just gonna tease them with two options that aren't real.
I'm gonna. No. I think we put up three. It's just through the course of the vote, there's often lots of comments justifying why we should go one way or the other, and it often makes me go, "I wish we were going the other way."
So keep in mind, chat. It doesn't matter who wins the votes; it's who's leaves the most compelling comment. That's what it's actually gonna be.
Spot on. Hey, Sotek.
If Nagash can roll book a soul. I assume that you're talking about stealing souls. Why can't a god steal a Nurgle demon as a personal servant, thus pushing his Chaos Realms claims? Greathorn Rat pushing power by stealing divine intervention Skaven's death. Okay, so I'm assuming you're saying if Nagash could steal souls like he did for like Krell, couldn't the Greathorn Rat do the same for this Nurgle demon?
The answer is kinda yes. It's a long and complicated situation that I think would actually require its own stream so that we could dive into it. Given the hour, not the best time for us to do it. But I do think that there could potentially be something in that, but that's not what we have here.
Yes, there's a lot we could unpack with that question. The only thing I'll say is that it gets hairy when like Crow was a mortal who dedicated his soul to a god, as opposed to like a demon, which is literally a fragment of a god. Yeah. So it gets hairy.
It does, and there's a lot of theological debate to be had in there as to what is exactly occurring. Hey, Mandatus, great to see you again. Andy, what do you think of Total War's Be'lakor claiming Malleus is his because he named it? I have no idea. So I have literally not played that. Can someone inform me?
Age of Sigmar came up with the idea that the Warhammer world's name is Malice, so Be'lakor is revealed in Total War to be like, I'm the one that called it Malice, therefore mine. I named it. Everyone uses my name, which gives some really weird ideas of who Be'lakor might have been in life. or mortal life if he got away with naming the planet. But
I'm not against that. I think I could write that into a pretty damn fine story.
yeah, but
There's definitely something in that.
Yeah,
but that doesn't necessarily make it the only thing. I mean, take for example the real world. How many names does it have? In how many different languages? And what is its real name? If we're speaking in English, we generally say Earth until we say Terra. So yeah, it's a complicated big affair, even when we're dealing with the real world and not a fantasy one.
Yeah, but yeah, Malice is the name Games Workshop came up with, though technically it's weird because in Age of Sigmar it seems to refer more to the core of the planet, not the whole planet. But anyway, we don't have time for that. Anyway, so questions. Who is Skrolk's biggest rival in Skavendom, and who is his biggest rival outside Skavendom? His biggest rival in Skavendom, he doesn't have a ton of stories about him, but it would be thankful by what
I'd say himself.
That's a fair answer that I could see someone being like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but given the nature of his characters, we've explored it through the course of this stream. If it is anywhere close to where we've landed, then it's a character who's riddled with a certain level of self-doubt, which means his biggest enemy is himself. He could probably have been much more successful if he had been more Skaven-y, I suppose, and just ridden out his errors. But instead of riding out his errors, he has dwelled and tried to better himself, which is not the Skaven route towards success.
Yeah. And I will say that Greyseers and Plague Priests, ugly relationship, and him and Thanquol have fucking hysterical interactions. And Skrolk is the only recurring villain. He's the villain in the first book, and he also is a recurring villain in the second book. So him and Thanquol kind of have a thing.
Thanquol, that'll do.
Yeah, but as far as outside of Skavendom, we don't Tehenowin, I guess.
Tehenowin, I suppose. But even then, not really.
It's kind of like Skrolk inheriting it, as opposed
to it really is.
Like he doesn't even meet Tehenowin until the end times.
If I was going to do anything, if you're wanting to do something like that, I would probably have had Mandred Skaven Slayer be somehow wrapped up into that tale. That would have been quite a fun way of giving a representation of his failure.
You could go with the Greyseer that fucked up the Black Plague in the storyline.
Yeah, that would be a
very good rival character.
Yeah, that'd
especially because he doesn't die in the Black Plague series, so he could theoretically still be around.
Yeah, that'd do pretty well actually.
Let's see. Is Clan Pestilens being? We already covered that. It's not. You could argue it's being deceived by Nurgle in the long play type scenario, just like how wizards are being deceived by Tzeentch. So yes, but not in like a really like hardcore sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, basically you're using chaos, so thus you are being inveigled by chaos, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily tricking you. If you've got your eyes wide open, you're not being tricked. It's a use.
Yep. Should Skrolk's final end-time showdown have been against Kroq-Gar as written, or would Tehenowin have been a bigger fight considering both are religious fanatics? The end times were a mess. They were just trying to throw who they could in, and they still only got like less than half of all the characters we wanted. Do I think it would have been more appropriate? I honestly, no. I think a better final fight would have been Vermalanx versus Tehenowin. That, especially if it was revealed he was the first Nurglitch and he's like, hey, rematch, I'm a demigod now. What do you got? That would have been interesting. I think Kroq-Gar was fine.
I'd have probably had him facing off against Nurgle Demon.
You could also do that. And that would have been really interesting. That would have been super interesting. And like, yeah, I would love to see how Skrolk would try, and especially because Skaven are such clever little shits. I would have loved to see how Nurgle or Skrolk would have tried to deal with that. Because hypothetically, he could, because Skrolk stops the cycle. He's just death. Yeah. There is no regrowth, it's just death. So he actually would make a very interesting opponent for a Nurgle entity.
I think it'd be quite fun.
Yeah. Let's see. Regen? Not in this house. Let's see. What's the silliest name for a disease Skrolk has come up with? Oh, God. Skaven have a lot of stupid disease names.
Skaven have stupid names in general because they're all English.
Yeah. I can't think of one off the top of my head, unfortunately, but there have been a couple of Skaven plagues that a lot of the diseases...
Basically, take a color and then add anything disease sounding after it. That's it.
Yeah, that is
yellow fever.
Yellow fever, red pox, black plague.
That's pretty much the Skaven naming device.
Yeah, there's the yellow. Oh God, there's another yellow one in the new Lustria book. It's always color thing.
Totally is.
Anyway, does Skrolk like cheese or extra moldy cheese? Probably rotten, awful cheese, because I don't think any food. Actually, I don't think Skrolk eats, to be honest. I think he just lives off of decay.
See, I don't know. This is one of those questions
like,
where it's easy to lapse into
gets to it.
Yeah, it's easy to lapse into stereotype, but I think there's a certain part of him that may even regret not being able to eat the way he used to be able to eat, because anything that comes close to him is going to degrade, it's going to rot. That is his palate. In many respects, that is his sacrifice for his service to his god. The fact that he can no longer eat food the way that everyone else can eat food.
Yeah.
Cheeses are going to be, now, as ridiculous as it is, probably one of the better foods because they don't go off that quick. In fact, cheese doesn't really go off. So the fact that it's coming in as it begins to pick up its molds, it's still going to be there, unlike beef. A good slab of beef reaches him and it just rots to nothing.
I'm pretty sure
cheese, ridiculously enough, is probably his favorite food.
I want to say there is a scene of Skrolk eating in the first Thankful Mud River book where there's something but what he's eating is like fucking ridiculous because of his shenanigans. But yeah, something like that. I also could love the idea of like him being one of the only Skaven that actually likes black grain, which for anyone that doesn't know, black grain is like one of the only things Skaven actually farm and grow around Skaven Blight. It's considered like holy and high prestige because it's grown in Skaven Blight, but every book that talks about black grain talks about how it sucks. Like Skaven hate how it tastes. It's awful. They only eat it for prestige.
Hey Marcus9343, thank you so much. Hugely appreciated. Been really enjoying these. Finally managed to catch one live to donate. Looking forward to rewatching it later. Thanks so much for the.
We may need to do more, like every once in a while, do an off.
Yeah, do a different time, totally.
For weeks, because we seem to be getting a lot of first time watchers.
Is that right, guy? Sorry to cut in during the Q&A time. Anytime, we really don't mind.
Yeah, but
wanted to ask if y'all will ever do a part 2 to your end times discussion. We did discuss this and we will do it at some point, but not for a while yet because the end times make us furious.
Yeah, next year. Because knowing us, it's not going to be the final part. It's just part 2.
Holy shit.
Yeah, we'll get there. How pestilent are the diseases of Skrolk? Does it bypass disease immunity because it's magical in nature? And would you need magical resistance and disease resistance to get close to him? That's actually a really interesting question.
Okay, so first things first, and to be as clear as we can, he has studied disease in its actual form, which is not necessarily magical. Let's start from that point, which means that it is the actual true manifestation of diseases in their various forms. And it doesn't really matter if you have magical immunities. In that case, you are going to fall to the disease. Now, would he also study magical diseases? And that, I think, is a fascinating question because it's an area that Warhammer has explained exceedingly poorly. And I do mean this quite bluntly. Yeah, but it's definitely a thing that's sort of there, and there's some spells that act like diseases and then just switch off when they stop, but there's not really a disease that uses magic as part of its vector to get to other people. And that, to me, is ridiculous given the very nature of the Jade Wind and how it could be used as a vector for diseases. So I think the answer would be, yes, there is a host that he has managed to manipulate in one fashion or another, given the Skaven intellect combined with the Warhammer world's basic metaphysics, so to speak. That's definitely going to occur. Now, would magical resistance help? The answer is almost certainly no, because it's going to be using the magical channels of the people involved. So the more magical you are, sadly, the more likely you would be to contract it, meaning that species like dwarves would do relatively well, although magical resistant, so interesting combo. But because of the nature of their material bodies being quite different to, say, elves, who are often extremely magical resistant, but would probably fall like flies.
Yeah, there's a whole thing. The Warhammer world has a very well-established concept that there are magically induced diseases, because they always talk about Shalians being like, oh, we can cure all diseases, but this one's magical from Nurgle, so we can't use mundane ways to treat it. Or like the dwarves, like Kugak Plaguefather hates them because they're resistant to his magical diseases. But it doesn't, they've never really done a great job of explaining what the fuck the difference between a magical disease is and a regular disease that is like induced by a magical entity. It's hairy.
Just be lazy writing. because they haven't really thought out how it works. It's just they put the word magical in front of it, and suddenly that means something else. Using it as a keyword rather than a descriptor that means something. Hey, the Game Doctor. Me refuses to acknowledge the end times. That's often me. Also me still aggressively blames Manfred and Teclis for the end times shenanigan.
Remember,
I think
hey,
fair.
If you're gonna blame anyone, blame Lilith. Okay?
Oh, fuck off! I'm not even gonna.
fault.
That's a different stream.
Anyway,
Don't get us started.
So, is there any disease out there that targets? Oh, okay. I love this question. From Jiggy. Is there any disease out there that Skrolk might create, or another Nurgle character, where the disease is designed to rout out other diseases? So, for instance, Skrolk creating a disease that's designed to attack and kill Nurgle diseases.
Yeah, I think that's exceedingly likely. And indeed, I think that is a route that I would have taken as an end time story. How do the Skaven get through a particular period? Because Clan Pestilens makes them immune to the very diseases that are bringing down others. Strongly dialing down hard on each of the 4 Chaos Powers where they're at their best. Disease that goes wild for Nurgle, but doesn't kill. It mutates and twists and does all manner of horrible things to you and gives you this horrible semblance of life as your body degrades. That's lovely. And then the Skaven come out largely immune to it because of the influences of Clan Pestilens. There would have been a really nice story in there somewhere that could have been plumbed through to how Skaven are not fucking Nurgle. They are completely different.
You know, a brain thought I have, if you wanted to have Skrolk as a character who's a major antagonist in your campaign, but he's also more dynamic, is what if one of your PCs gets Nurgle's rot? Skrolk would probably be one of the only characters who would know how to cure it.
Yeah,
because he could give you a disease that kills the rot, which would be fucking fascinating.
Yeah, that's super fun. That's the sort of shit you should be looking at, trying to use the established world facts and going, how do they collide and create new and interesting circumstances? In this case, Nurgle creating this perversion of life and twisting you to demonhood, balanced off with someone that understands disease to its very component details, including all of the Nurgle diseases. What does this mean? And then playing a story that answers that.
Skaven sorcerer science is so fucking awesome.
Like
that is like one of their best things. Okay, so does Skrolk scour the world for diseases like Kugath? Yes, the Liber Bubonicus is all about recording information, so they're pretty big about finding new diseases where they can.
Absolutely.
How many minions does he have? A lot. So many. There's even a fun note. One of my favorite notes in the Black Library book is that even among the plague monks and plague censer bearers that serve Skrolk, he has to give them a oh my god, what do you call it, to protect against disease? Injection.
Inoculation? What are you looking for?
Sure, inoculation.
A vaccine?
Thank you, vaccine. That's what I was going for. He gives the servants that are around him a vaccine that makes them able to not die just being in his presence, because he's that bad. But he's also that clever that he came up with the vaccine for it.
Recommend it. I have played campaign with Skaven more than once. It's a lot of
Warhammer
fun.
Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition, Children of the Horned Rat has an excellent system for playing a Skaven campaign. It is hilarious.
Good times.
It heavily encourages treachery without flat out killing each other, and it's great. It's really funny. The Favor of the Horned Rat is one of the most hilarious rules I've ever read in a game. How would Skrolk? Okay, we've already answered that. Let's see. Could Lord Skrolk go against Nurgle Plague Brewers in a brewing contest and have a chance to win? Probably not against Kugath. Dr. Festus? I think he could handle Dr. Festus. It would be hard.
Festus is young.
Yeah, but he does have like the knowledge of all disease forcefully implanted into his head.
Sure.
So he kind of
young. But he's young.
True.
There's a difference between experience and wisdom. And base just knowledge. He's got knowledge, but he doesn't have the experience to put it into practice. I'll give an example that's completely out of line. Imagine you could be invisible all the time. Everyone would think you'd be super good at hiding, but you wouldn't. You'd be shit at hiding. You'd just be really good at standing in front of people being invisible. And somewhat similarly, he's no good at disease. He just has all disease in his head. He just creates a thing. He has no idea what to do with it. All he does is the worst every single time. Doesn't mean he understands how it works. He's just got it. Skrolk has experienced centuries of it. he would be doing finely, carefully, and properly in a fashion that probably wouldn't be detected. On the other side, it's just disease.
Honestly, when you really think about it, I think Dr. Festus would almost make ironically, and like it fits his backstory, he'd probably make a better doctor than a lot of people would expect than a disease creator.
Yeah.
Just because that's what he was really fucking good at. And like he would have been even better at it if he hadn't just fucking lost his marbles. Poor bastard. His story is so good. It's so sad, but it's so good.
Yeah, I was weaving it into. We were weaving that into fantasy roleplay. Actually, we started writing.
It is still there.
I'm glad to hear that
they have leaned pretty heavy into it. You don't have to use him, but he definitely makes an appearance. Let's see. If Gelt died by Skrolk, would Andy be satisfied?
No, because Gelt would be dead, and he deserves to suffer.
There you go. Okay, we already answered that. Would Skrolk have been worthy of becoming a Vermin Lord? I think so. I think so.
Yes, but would Skrolk think he's worthy? And I think the answer is no. I think if we were going to run with the character we're building here, Skrolk would need to win first. I think, for example, if he had taken Lustria through disease and then exalted out of that, that would have been fucking amazing.
Andy, what would
then you could have had a fight with him against Nurgle.
Has there ever been an exploration of what would happen to someone that was given Ascension and felt they didn't deserve it? Like what that would do to them? Because I bet that would make a weird Demon Prince type character.
Certainly would. And I think that's, I mean, when you're creating characters, rather than just lean into archetypes and stereotypes, it is often worth trying to build just better characters. And far too many of the ones in Warhammer are lacking the character in terms of the black and white surface details, but often if you think, there's a lot of it hiding beneath the surface.
Man, that could actually make a really fun antagonist. Would be like an imposter syndrome Demon Prince.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Too relatable.
And yeah, too relatable.
If Skrolk was afflicted by Nurgle's rot, would he be able to tank it? Yes, I think he would absolutely. Because
in fact, it wouldn't surprise me. Significantly, yeah, he will have significantly studied Nurgle's rot and used it to his own effect. It wouldn't surprise me if they've got their own adaptations of the disease that they have been using to kill or otherwise impose their will upon others.
Servant of Sin asked a question that actually reminded me of a funny thing I was going to tell you. So in Total War, they did something really silly with the Liber Bubonicus, which was probably just due to an error in when they were putting in the game. And that Skrolk has a voice line whenever you're like interacting with him, where he'll be like, "I'll write your name in the Liber Bubonicus." They turned it into the Death Note, where like, so if Skrolk writes your name in the Liber Bubonicus, you get horribly diseased and died, which is so fucking funny to me because it's like,
sure, why not? That. Sounds good to me.
I didn't realize Skrolk was an anime character, but apparently he is. He's got a Death Note. Are plague spells unlawful for Grey Seers? No. The spell plague have been converted.
And not only that, the plague spell across various editions has been just core Skaven magic. Rats come hand in hand with disease. The plague priests do not have a monopoly on disease. Don't think of it like that. Disease is a core part of Skaven society. It's just the plague priests go far further with it.
Yeah, they leaned into it super heavy. Yeah, I actually really like that in Total War, the Grey Seers have a different version of the lore of plague than the plague priests do, because the plague priests have a unique spell called Pestilent Birth, where they like create a bunch of plague monks and shit, whereas the Grey Seers have Dreaded 13th. Which is it's a nice little thing. But yes, as far as the lore goes, to my knowledge, there's never been anything about writing somebody's name into a Liber Bubonicus and it kills them. That is never what it's been used for, but I find it fucking hilarious. And why not? How did Skrolk get to Lustria? Trick question. He flew. Ugh.
Oh, fuck's sake. Who wrote that? They deserve a fucking medal.
Sanguinius the Brave.
Sanguinius, that was a brave choice.
It's Rowdy wrote that.
Rowdy, okay.
Rowdy, that was a very, very good one. And if your question was legitimate, he walked like Skaven do everywhere. They walked through the undertunnels. Oh my god.
Hey, Mandathus.
Celestial Demon Prince in excess, the unworthy untyrant of guilt. Could make for a really fun character.
I think there's definitely something in that. It is an obvious Slaanesh choice. Yeah, there's definitely.
Yeah, I would go either Slanesh or Nurgle for that, with Nurgle being like the
Nurgle would
despairing
suit really
aspect,
well.
but like an actual despairing demon prince.
Oh, I
which
can
are
get a
pretty
good
rare.
corn one as well. Oh, I've got a
Ooh,
good
yeah,
corn
that's
one in
true.
my mind. Yeah.
Man, you gotta
Okay,
love
well,
those.
this is slightly
Anyway,
beside the
yeah,
point.
moving on.
Carry on.
Who's the most untrustworthy Skaven? Hilariously, I would say probably either Queek Headtaker or Tretch Craventail.
Fucking hell, they're all as bad as each
Yeah,
other.
they're all awful. They're all awful,
They're
but like
fucking terrible.
Queek is fucking bonkers, so like you never know what the fuck he's gonna do. But Tretch is hilarious. Like I love.
That's a little bit like saying what human's got the most skin. I mean, we've all got skin, but which one's the skinniest skin? Wait,
Yeah.
what? They're Skaven. They're treacherous.
What's the
Hey,
greatest?
Necro Player 97?
Oh, do you think we can make a tier of bad Warhammer story / Rushcon? Maybe. Maybe. A part of me would feel bad for doing that because I don't want to.
I just don't like it. I don't
want to
pulling
put
apart
writers
other
on
people's
blast.
work. Yeah, it's not fun.
So
we all make mistakes. We all do things that are perhaps not best. I've written things that I look back on and say, "Oh, I wish I'd done that a bit differently." That happens. But
could we do a tier list for what tier we think every character from like the Total War Legendary lore is, like how good their stories are in a tier list? That we could do. Maybe we could do that for the end of the year or New Year or something. That could
be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Like we would have a lot of really interesting arguments over what tier certain characters would go in. Yeah, that could be fun. Well, yeah, we'll see about.
That's S tier. God damn it!
Yeah.
S for Skrolk.
S for Skrolk. I would put Skrolk S tier, even though a lot of it is a
dude, you're gonna put everyone that's a lizard man S tier and post it to Skaven because they're tier 2. I mean, I do recall an old one that you particularly was it Nah, that's S tier, right?
Oh, shut the fuck up, Andy. It took me a second. How dare you equate me to the old ones? How fucking dare you? Fucking Norskin frog poser. Anyway, what is the greatest plague Skrolk has ever made? According to our philosophy, yeah, we think the Black Death or the Black Plague. It's not. Yeah. Skrolk is never personally credited explicitly, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he created the Black Plague, in which case that would be it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would suggest that if we're in a position where we could just sit down and write the lore, that would be one of Skrolk's greatest successes that he was robbed of. And I think that making that a core component of his character is a good choice.
Yeah, come on, GW. He'll be around. He'll be in the old world when they add Skaven to bring him back.
Totally.
So I would love for that him to get updated stories. Who, if anyone, could endure Skrolk at his peak? Other big disease characters would have a pretty good chance. Tehennwyn is very resistant to disease in particular. Like Tehennwyn is designed to deal with their shenanigans, so Tehennwyn would be a problem. In our vision of the end times, would Clan Pestilens be forced to work with Nurgle to make the ultimate plague, or be doing their own little thing in Lustria? I would have them start working with Nurgle and then backstab the fuck out of them because Skaven.
Yeah, there's a story there that you need to tell, and I don't think they've told one. There's clearly connections between the two that need to be explored, but they also need to be examined so you can see where the differences lie. And that is something that just didn't happen, and that's a shame.
Yeah, and the Lustria storyline, I was fine with it. There should have been more baddies in Lustria than just Clan Pestilens. There should have been demons and the Vampire Coast.
Where's the fucking chaos?
Yeah, like where's Chaos? Where are the Dark Elves? Where's the Vampire Coast? Like all those guys should have been going nuts.
Yeah.
There should have been a lot of shenanigans happening. Like it should have been Nurgle and Pestilens in Lustria. That could have been cool.
That would have been a better choice.
Yeah. Anyway, do I think? Okay, we're almost done. We only got like a couple left. If Skrolk ate a Nurgling, how would it affect him? Funny enough, I think he'd be fine.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? They are demons, so it's not
Granted, like demons aren't good eating because they don't.
Yeah.
Like when they die, they just kind of bleh. They
well,
depending.
It's a complicated thing.
Yeah.
And there are many ways around the bleh, for example. But ultimately, I think he wouldn't, because it would be foolish. But I do think that a Nurgle demon would survive in his presence. Why would you do it? What would be the point? That's the big question.
Would a fellow Plague Lord trying to prove a point and being an idiot eat a Nurgling? Yes, and probably die from it.
John Steele, not very knowledgeable here. Don't worry about it. That's what we're here for. But have Skaven always been around, or did they come into existence after the old ones left? They have not always been around.
Yeah, they're actually relatively recent. Go watch our
really recent.
stream.
Our Mermidia stream, we dive into quite a lot. Sotek does a pretty big summary of the Skaven creation. It happened about 3,600 years ago, in terms of the end of the world, 3,600 years before that, approximately. I might have my years off by like 100 or so. But they're a new creation, and they spread quickly, very quickly. Within about a few hundred years, they were in most parts of the world.
Yep, like rats.
Like rats.
Let's see. If Skrolk unleashed one of his plagues on the realm of Nurgle, would it have a noticeable impact? Yes, because it would. I think it would genuinely be killing the garden, and Nurgle would be super fucking upset.
Yeah, there is a difference between Skrolk's diseases and indeed the Horn's rat diseases and Nurgle's diseases. They are not expressing in the same way. But when you're dealing with the realm of chaos, it would be pretty much impossible. It just wouldn't work because it is almost the concept of disease in that form. And to impinge upon it means that Nurgle himself would be losing a battle with the Horned rat. And I don't just mean a simple battle on a battlefield. I would mean the Horned rat is rising in ascendancy above Nurgle. And the chances of that happening within the Warhammer world are next to zero. Yeah, but as a concept, definitely it would be bad news.
In Age of Sigmar, that I would not be shocked if that ends up being a storyline. Actually,
it'd work.
Fact, for
very well for Age of Sigmar.
If you like Skaven and you like what you're hearing, it's a really good time to keep your eyes on Age of Sigmar, because going into 4th edition, we just got the very last book for 3rd edition.
4th edition already. Holy shit.
Yeah, I know. Time's going. But 4th edition is coming up sometime in the new year, probably in the spring. And it is pretty much seems to be that the Skaven are going to be the main antagonist of 4th edition. So the Great Horn, the Skaven they've been building up to a civil war, so likely their civil war is going to kick off, and it's going to lead to the Horned Rat doing something, which I'm really fucking excited to see because they haven't done a lot in the last edition or so. Nice. Anyway, some birthday questions. Skrolk got to me before the stream. 23 winters. Well, happy birthday, Gromriddle.
Happy birthday!
23, little babby.
23. I remember 23.
Do you?
Oh, dude. Oh, that was like right in my heart.
That's what you get for bringing up Grimlow. That's what you get.
Oh, yeah, no, I deserve it.
Has Skrolk given some diseases to dwarfholds? I would be shocked if he hasn't.
Yeah, almost certainly. And dwarves are far from immune to disease. They're tough, obviously, but they're as susceptible as any species to particular types of disease.
Yeah,
I would laughing god.
Oh, as a last little thought on that, I would actually say Skrolk's diseases would be the most effective against dwarves because he would have a much better understanding of the material world than Nurgle demons tend to.
Yep, I completely agree. In relation to your idea of Skaven torturing a demon, are there any weapons in fantasy that permakill demons like in 40k? I am drawing a blank. Yeah! Yep. I mean, the code is often God Killer. That's often the code used for things that can kill etheric entities.
I'll give you three up
for your three.
Top of my head, Sword of Cain, obviously.
That's one.
The Destroyer of Eternities from the Tomb Kings.
2.
Can destroy immortal souls and gods. And then the Blade of Realities from the Lizardmen, which is a really freaky weapon because it destroys you on all planes of reality simultaneously somehow.
Yeah, it's the classic Blade of Realities. There's also a manner of ones hidden away in roleplay books, like, say, for example, the Grieve. The Grieve is a dagger that was supposedly used by Cain to kill Mor and send him permanently into the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all manner of things that can make significant differences to etheric entities. So the answer is yes.
Yeah, some people would argue the Fellblade. It has it's flat out stated if Nagash's hand had not gotten away, the Fellblade would have killed him, and that's pretty impressive.
It is. Although I'd argue possibly the Fellblade is designed to kill material creatures.
That's fair.
Rather than immaterial. But let's be honest, it's fucking wrong. Strength 10 doing D6 wounds in its first iteration.
Yeah,
it was nasty.
Bonkers. Yeah, I think in its later ones it doesn't even roll to wound. It just deals mortals. It's awful.
Yeah, just nasty weapon.
Let's see. Why have Clan Pestilens started most of the civil wars in Skavendom? Because they were powerful and they knew it.
And also, we've got to, when it comes to war, there's generally some form of resource at hand. And resources are complicated. They're not just oil. Resources can be just down to basic thought. people believing in your way of life or not believing in your way of life. They might, for example, have a religious imperative to have the horned rat be approached in the way that they believe it should be approached. Skaven also, they work off of warfare. There's a great deal of advantage to be gained through conflict, and they are power-hungry little bastards. So, loosely speaking, it's no great surprise. They were powerful, they could rise to ascendancy, and they could bring everyone else underneath their heel.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the Skaven as a race are always in civil war. The two great civil wars were basically just, it was so bad that the Council of 13 just kind of like ceased to exist because the council itself broke apart and the Skaven were in complete madness. And
it's actually fair to say that civil war is the Skaven's natural state of existence.
Yeah,
it's only when they are driven not to that they don't. War is their preferred state. Fighting each other for resources at all times.
This is a joke question, but I just want to answer it because it makes me laugh. According to the text on the blade, yes. if you got stabbed by the Blade of Realities and you had a 40k version, technically it should kill you in both.
Yeah, absolutely.
All realities that it kills you on.
And I have no particular issue with Warhammer and 40k existing within the same metaphysical reality, so to speak. And in that case, yes, that would kill them in all forms. And the same could happen to, say, Be'lakor, who is also kicked around in multiple places.
Yeah, he's too busy getting killed by rocks from Tic-Tac-Toe. It's one of my favorite white dwarfs ever. Should Skrolk fall into the ocean, how much of ocean life would perish? Well, the ocean's pretty fucking big, so honestly, in the grand scheme of things, a lot. He would just drown.
Yeah, and the thing about the ocean is it's fucking huge, and drowned rat might drown, but a Skaven probably wouldn't drown. They're pretty good swimmers. It's one of those things.
It's kind of the hilarious thing that no matter how powerful a character is, there are some things that just kind of like they're still a character. You know, the ocean, the most powerful greater demon, if you throw him to the bottom of the ocean, he's still gonna die. More than likely. Which is fun. Like, you know, it keeps things interesting. That there's no such thing as an invincible entity. Not really.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's see. What would happen if the yellow skull fever had been used? How better would the so I want to say yellow skull fever is from the new Lustria book.
Couldn't forget. Yeah.
You know, it's like any other kind of diseases. Like it's nasty. It has some cool effects. But like, especially when it comes to like dwarfs, they are surprisingly good at dealing with things that you would think would just destroy them. And how could they possibly answer to it? They're inventive, cleverly so. And they'd find a way.
Yeah, as ridiculous as this is going to sound to say, it would be as effective as the writer at hand decided that it was effective. It could have been a drop in the water.
That's too meta of an answer, Andy.
And I know that sounds silly, but when it comes to diseases, most writers aren't really aware of how they work at all. It's just, I'm going to give it a funny name, and I'm going to say it kills lots and lots and lots of people. So it's very difficult to then say how effective that's going to be in the real Warhammer world, because it will.
You mean writers aren't experts on every subject they write about? What?
No, they don't. When it comes to things like diseases, they rarely even bother doing their due diligence and checking how diseases work. Because why bother? I mean, it makes your arms swell up and your face go purple. How? I don't know. It's my fucking disease I just made up.
Brain fever. Leave me alone,
doctor. Exactly. Leave me alone. But it's pretty much par for the course for that sort of thing.
Are there any good Skaven novels out there? Yes. The Thankful and Bone Ripper trilogy is fucking amazing. The Black Plague trilogy is quite fun. Very, very good read. The Queek Headtaker novel is great. Age of Sigmar has quite a few good books about Skaven. Not as many as you might expect. They actually have much less AOS stuff than fantasy stuff so far. They got a lot of first edition stuff, but they haven't since.
I half recall Headtaker being pretty decent.
Headtaker is super fun. Like it is very well written.
Ages since I read any of them though.
It's one of those Black Library books that perfectly adds to the canon without adding anything that screws anything else up. Like it felt researched. David Geimer did a really good job.
Yeah.
I love his Queek Headtaker book because like it gives Queek stuff to do and it develops his character without making him stupid.
I half remember him chatting away to his.
Oh yeah, he talks to his heads. It opens so many questions about what the fuck Queeks like is, which is great. That's what the book should do. It doesn't tell you like, oh, are the heads real? Like we don't have time for this. We'll come back.
Yeah, you're right. We don't.
Remember, 5K subs on Andy. I'll do a whole lure video.
And we're only about 1,100 subs away from that. So go over to LAWhammer and click subscribe over in LAWhammer's YouTube channel.
Yeah, there's hello, I don't know what's happened, so I'm here just to spread rage. The gaggle of best characters are Kabanda, Krimlo, Gelt, and Curious Geezer. What he's just trying to make us mad.
I actually feel sick.
He's just
how could you? I'm putting your comment away, Kabanda. Oh no.
He just wants to make us mad so you can feed off
Appreciated.
it. Fucking nerd. All right. Last 4 questions, I think. 5 or so. Why? Okay. Oh no, we already answered that one.
Excellent. That was easy.
More
questions like that.
Are pestilent rat ogres common, similar to Skrolk's rat ogres Nox and Pox from the Thanquol story? In the lore, yes, they would be reasonably common. In the battle game, they're not for dumb reasons. They just wanted it to be Clan Mulder's thing, so they don't do it. But the Lustria book actually gives you plague rat ogre rules. But yeah, they would be all over the place. Like, there's no way Clan Pestilens would not be buying rat ogres and giving them diseases to make them nasty.
Yeah, all of that.
Just like it wouldn't be unusual to see like Clan Pestilens like buying war machines from Clan Scryer and maybe kind of fuck with them a little bit and all that other stuff. Like they would mess if you're playing a role play scenario. The battle game standardizes things because there has to be a limit. When you're looking at the lore, it's supposed to work like reality would. So there would be way tons of exceptions and crazy things.
Yeah, it's a little bit like saying, hey, I'm British, so I'm not allowed to buy a Chinese phone.
Yeah. How did Skrolk end up with the Liber Bubonicus? Probably when he took the role. We don't know, but probably when he took the role as Plague Lord, especially when he ascended to being the greatest of the Plague Lords.
Yeah, I think that's the only answer we can say with anything close to a definitive.
Yeah, I would actually be kind of shocked because there's only 7 Plague Lords. Like, that's it. There's only 7. I would be kind of shocked if each of them does not have at least a volume of the Liber Bubonicus with them.
Yeah, so my personal preference would be something along the lines of he proselytizes himself before the first Nurglitch, elevated, kicks about, learns lots of stuff, eventually elevated up to the point that is given said book, and the book that he's carrying is the one that was originally stolen from the unspecified Nurgle cultist by presumably Nurglitch in the first place. That for me would work really nicely and would give him a special position, would mark him out as somewhat separate.
It would also make that Liber Bubonicus so special to him because it was a gift from the first Nurglitch, which would be huge.
And I think that would
literally the guy he tore his eye outs for. That would be
totally.
Oh my god.
That just gives him a really lovely little story. And I think that's really nice. And also, to a degree, if we say, for example, it was Nurglitch that was taking the knowledge of disease from said demon and utilizing it on behalf of the Horned Rat, it would make more sense why there's 7s everywhere. It's literally nothing to do with Nurgle. It's to do with the association that number has with disease and promoting the best out of it with the knowledge that they had. The 7s would make more sense.
Yeah, and that would do a better job of explaining why the gods even have numbers. It's because it's not about the god, it's about the subject matter. Where disease is 7, blood and war and all that craziness is 8. Magic is 9, not because it's necessarily Zinch, that's just magic.
Yeah. And by doing that and making it that also
that makes
allows
the world building so much better.
It doesn't. It makes it more fun too, because it means if you use it, you're using chaos to a degree, and that is fun because you've got that classic. Oh, do I want to? But it will bring benefit, but that benefit potentially comes at a cost.
Yep. Like, oh man, I need to do this awesome ritual to save our city. If we use the number 9, we know it's going to probably be more powerful, successful, but
it's going to be dangerous.
Yeah. But there might be an asterisk.
Choices is what make things fun.
Yep. Let's see. Can Skrolk actually perceive things through his warpstone eye? So I think it's in the I don't remember if it's the first or second Thanquol book. There's a moment, there's a part where Skrolk gets warpstone put into his eye sockets. I can't remember why he does it. He doesn't need them to see.
That.
He does not need them to see.
And he sees the world in shades of purple and green, according to a couple of the sources that they copy pasted over from the first description. And they kind of ditch that in later ones and just see he just sees through his virulent
shades of disease.
Yeah, indeed, shades of disease. But really, no need for any warpstone to allow him to see.
I can't remember why he has those in the book. I can't remember if the author goofed and thought that he needs them, but most iterations of Skrolk, his eye sockets are empty and they just weep like green, nasty pus stuff. But they're empty. He doesn't have warpstone eyes in the vast majority. I would say 99.9999% of his iterations.
Yeah.
Would Skrolk like to be a pet? Probably not.
I'm gonna guess no.
Would you or Andy rather A, clip Skrolk's toenails, or B, squeeze one pustule? Yeah, I'll take the nails, thanks. I'm gonna die, but no, I'm not squeezing shit.
No! That's what I see.
And then the last question from Brady, which is a Total War question. If Skrolk got plague brewing mechanics in Total War, which he fucking better when they do the next Skaven update, what would be some must-have effects? I'm not too worried about the effects, other than, you want your attrition damage, and like if a Skaven unit get it, it's a buff, but if it's on an enemy unit, it's a debuff, like kind of the classic stuff that Nurgle does. But for me, I would want him to have certain famous diseases as like the recipe diseases, where if you put the right ingredients together, you get the Black Plague or the Red Pox or Yellow Eye Fever. You get the Skaven ones instead of the Nurgle ones. Like, Skrolk probably shouldn't have access to Nurgle's Rot. He should get the Black Plague instead. Or the Yellow Eye Fever or whatever. Those really famous Skaven specific ones. Is math really just the Chaos Gods? You're not. Yes, actually.
Okay, so yes. And by that I mean that the Chaos Gods and the gods and everything that is a reflection over in the Aether is nothing more than conceptual stuff. Emotions made manifest, so to speak. And in that regard, math is just a part of the construction of the universe. So the answer is yes, the gods are a fundamental part of that.
Yep. So yes, there's a horrible chaos god of math who delights in your suffering whenever you're doing it. All right, but that's it. So that
was super fun.
Yeah, we are out of time. We somehow made it like we always do.
Yeah, we did.
And there were things that we kind of had to skip that were not related to Skrolk, of course, but there were a couple subject matters people brought up that are really, really interesting that we may have to think about and do with future stuff. So
yeah.
Thank you all very much for being here. We really appreciate everyone showing up on kind of an off day. I was not expecting as many people to show up, so it was nice to get a huge crowd.
You all rock.
We love your faces very, very much. Hope you're staying safe for the holidays and all the craziness going into December. Just a quick reminder to please like the stream. It helps promote it to other places on YouTube. Subscribe. Check out LAWhammer. It's fucking amazing. It's so good. It's so good. And it's long, but it's really, really worth it. And it's a lot of fun. It's plenty of hours of content. And also check out Rookery Publications. Do you know who your guest is this week? Are y'all
I have no idea.
All right. Andy likes to pretend he's involved with the show, but I guess.
I mean, I could find out.
Go check out Rookery Publications. They have a lot of really cool stuff. There's a lot of really insightful stuff for world building, writing in general, role playing, storytelling. It's an excellent, excellent show every Saturday. Every Saturday.
Every Saturday, 7 p.m.
Yeah, and if you're a patron, sometimes, even more recently, as the days have been going, actually, they've been doing special bonus streams where you get to interact with people like Andy Law or the other Andy, because there's so many Andys, and get to have like genuinely awesome, insightful conversations, which I missed the last two, which is really upsetting to me, but unfortunately I was busy. So that is it. Please go check out all those things. Thank you for watching.
And I would just like to end on my one as well, which is, for fuck's sake, if you haven't done it already, just press subscribe on Loremaster of Sotek's channel. And I know that he's just said that multiple times, but really, so many of you don't. I know for a fact that we have had thousands of views that aren't repeat views. And of those thousands of views, many of you are not subscribers. I take that as a personal affront. That, my friends, you
hurt Andy's feelings.
Put you on almost the same level as Gelt.
Oh, man.
How could you do that? to Sotek to me. That is a creme roll like action. So on that one, I would like to say thanks everyone. You absolutely did rock.
One last
we'll
question for you.
Next. Oh yes.
Because I'm
Gwen
curious.
Callaghan. Yeah. So at the moment, my entire room's getting gutted out. So nothing is connected up, and it's all going. I'm not
be
sure.
determined.
If I can't get it sorted in the next week or so, I'm just going to recite my computer in another room while I wait for them to redo my ceiling. It's a real pain in the arse because I'm really keen to get diving into shit, and I'm just sort of hanging around, not doing the stuff I want to do. So very, very soon.
Bye-bye.
I forgot what I was going to end on there. So whatever. Subscribe and shit.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. We'll see you all later.
Yeah, bye.
Right, bye-bye.
Sunday.
Oh, yes. I do remember. Sunday, 7 p.m. No, 4 p.m. UK.
Yeah.
What time's that for you?
10 a.m. CST.
10 a.m. CST.
Normal time.
Normal time next Sunday. It'll be my birthday stream. I'm going to throw up topics. I'll probably let you choose one of them. Until then, we'll see you later.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.